Guys, we've seen it. We've seen it. The Batman. And we have a lot to talk about. So this might be a long episode. But I brought along Bad Val once again because I think, he's basically you're like the resident Batman guy that I know, so I figure it'd be appropriate to have you on again. So yeah, welcome back, Bat Val.
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So I think the way I want to start this off, I want to give my overall impressions because I've seen it just last night, so it's still fresh in my mind pretty much. And yeah, I hand it over to you after I give my impressions, and then we can kind of break down bit by bit here, because I want to do we'll talk about Batman, we'll talk about the story, we'll talk about what we liked, what we didn't like, and there's a lot to break down, so it's a complicated one.
So is this spoiler or non-spoiler? I'm assuming spoiler.
Yeah, this is gonna be a spoiler review because we're gonna go into pretty much everything, I think. And I think it's appropriate because I think most people have seen it by now. So yeah. But to be fair, I'll give a spoiler warning before I start going into the crazy stuff. But yeah, so yesterday I was sitting in my apartment, kind of bored. I was like, you know what? I'll go watch the Batman. It's been a week. The hype has kind of died down a bit, so yeah, go check it out. And 3 hours later, I come out, and I have to say, man, I want to be as objective and fair as possible, man. I honestly I just want to put this out there. I always go into movies hoping that they're good. I always want to go in there and be pleasantly surprised and see what happens. So, I was like, okay, Mary's, let's see what you got. I honestly came out of that theater and I felt a little bit let down, man. The thing is, man, this movie is really complex because I think Matt Reeves did something very interesting, because what he did was he took a lot of different things from other Batman movies. He put a unique spin on it, and it's not completely his own vision, but at the same time, he's come out with something here that's basically what he did was he created a crime film with Batman in it. And it was actually quite good in that regard, but I think the problem was there was so much going on in this movie. I mean, there's a point in this movie about, maybe halfway through where the movie completely changes its subplot and follows a completely different subplot. I mean, this thing is very, very condensed. So my initial response was that, I think what I saw was interesting and had a lot of good ideas put into it. But my overall impression was that I felt like it didn't really come together. There was so much going on, and I feel like some of the Batman elements in the movie kind of weren't really what I was expecting. And it wasn't bad. I'm not saying this film was bad. It definitely was not bad. But for me, it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. That's just my initial response. How'd you feel coming out of the theater?
I think the film exceeded my expectations. I mean, I thought it would be a good film, but I wasn't sure how to feel about it as a Batman film before I saw it. Having seen it now, I think it's a good Batman entry. I think there's good and bad elements of the film, strengths and weaknesses. I think there are things that were along what I expected. There were things that surprised me and were a little bit different than what I expected.
Mm-hmm.
But we could talk each character and all that type of thing. But I think there's elements of it I really, really liked. There's elements of it I was neutral to, and there's elements of it I didn't like so much. So we can get into that. But overall, it did do better than what I expected it to do, and I would say I was happy with it. You know, as a Batman film, coming off the most recent ones with Nolan and Snyder, and those films having their own strengths and weaknesses. I think that what this starts, I was happy with. Similarly, you know, to what we've seen before. I mean, when Nolan came out with Batman Begins, I was happy with Batman Begins, but I had things I liked about it, things I didn't like about it. As that went on, there were certain things that, as a film, I was still okay with. Like Dark Knight, I was still okay with as a film. Rises, I was still okay with it as a film. It was just Batman I had issues with. So with this, I feel kind of similar to Begins. I like it more than Begins, and we could get into some reasons why. But my curiosity from that standpoint is, okay, good start with some strengths and weaknesses. Now let's see where this goes on a second film or on a third film, because that's where the director, usually you see them double down, and whatever strengths they've had either continue to be strengths, but sometimes their weaknesses come to light when they get to a second or third film, and that's where you really see what's working and what's not working. The first film,
that's a good point.
yeah, it's always like a little bit of a mixed bag, and this one for sure was a mixed bag because so many Batman films came out before it that, of course, you know, it does pay homage to certain things as well. So, you know, we could get into those details, what was familiar, what was retreaded, what was new, what was something that was just spun a different way, and, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, you brought up the point of it being mixed, and I really do feel that way about this movie. Because there are some parts of this movie where Matt Reeves knocks it out of the park. Like, there's a couple scenes, I'll talk about them, you know, later on, but man, it's almost as if, like, I wish there were certain choices that were made slightly different, man. And I think we should probably go into the story next, because I think actually the story of this movie might be one of the strongest parts of it, because I like the idea that they had for this thing, man, because it really felt like a graphic novel, man, in parts. And the portrayal of how they did Riddler and all the way that, you know, they built him up, and how the story sort of ties into like Gotham City and ties into Batman's past and all these things. I thought that was quite well done. But the problem is, I think that there was way too many subplots in this thing. And I noticed when I was watching it, the movie sort of started to dip right when they started bringing in Catwoman. Because before that, everything was running perfectly well, man. I was enjoying the hell out of it. I really enjoyed the intro. One small gripe I have about the intro, though, but we can talk about that in the Batman section I had. But I thought the story was well done in this, and I think that's probably what really kind of carried the movie for me. What do you think about the story, Bethel?
I like the story. I think the fact that the movie is on the longer end of things, and the fact that the narrative is a mystery, helps itself. You know, it doesn't feel rushed. And if you're dealing with something that's a crime thriller genre, mystery detective type of film, one of the worst things you can do is feel rushed or feel like something didn't take enough time, especially when mystery tends to go slower, you know, just as a genre.
Right, yeah.
I think one of the biggest strengths is the very opening of the film. Matt Reeves, you know, when he and you know, off the bat, I prefer the first half of the movie to the second half of the movie. I do see
definitely
big differences there, especially towards the end of the movie. But his opening, I would say, was very strong, and it reminds me of, you know, one of the reasons I think the first two Batman films are so strong, Batman 89, Batman Returns. You don't see it as much in Batman Forever. You don't see it as much in Begins, I don't feel, at least for me. But one of the strengths you do see in those first two, that you also see with Matt Reeves' The Batman, is a strength of setting and tone, right? When I think right before I saw the movie, I saw The Mask of Phantasm, the Batman animated movie.
Oh, that movie's great.
Yeah, and it kind of reminded me of that because, you know, he opens up with the Bruce Wayne voiceover in the diary, and we see the criminals in the setting of Gotham. But the way that he shoots it he shoots it kind of like if you watch Mask of Phantasm, one of the things that I think stands out about that version of Batman compared to all the other ones is the scope, the scale, and the epicness, right? Buildings seem very tall. You have perspectives looking up, you have perspectives looking down. By the time Batman comes into the story, you already have a sense of what that Gotham looks like. It's very monolithic. I mean, the movie opens up with the credits with that Greek orchestral like symphony score, right? So already that's like epic scope because of the music, right? So similarly, the way Reeves opens this up to me really feels like Mask of the Phantasm, because you do see he has that great shot, as he's talking with the voiceover, he has the shot of the criminal looking up at the spotlight, looking down on him, right? And there's this great scope because he's on like a government building, so you have like the Greek column of the building he was graffitiing on, and then obviously the light, the spotlight, or the whatever, the blimp headlight hits him, kind of similar to what you see in the animated series, and he looks up and he's kind of scared, right? And that's what you want to see before you see Batman, right?
Yes.
Like before you introduce us to your version of Batman, you need to set the setting, you need to set the table, right? So Batman 89, that's what he always did. You remember Batman Returns, you see the crib going down the riverbanks with the penguin, and the music's playing, and it's that Danny Elfman score, and you get this like very wintry setting. You see the penguin and his parents kind of abandon him, and then the credits roll, and then you have this big credit sequence before you actually get into the film, right? Like that. You have to make the movie feel big, because when you make the movie feel big, then you introduce Batman to us quietly as an internally big character in an externally big world, right? So I think Reeves did a great job with that, and I think it was a great strength to get you into that comic book film, like you mentioned, it's kind of like a comic book page, right? Because every comic book, it sets the setting before you see Batman, right? Unless it's like a part 2 or part 3 of the story.
Especially when you're establishing a new Batman. Like, the first thing you're supposed to do is pretty much, you have to establish him right away. You gotta let the audience know, boom, this is what we're dealing with right away. And I think the problem I had with the intro was that it's a small gripe, but it's something that I think would have really kind of amped it up a bit more. You know how they... Anyway, we're gonna go into spoilers right now, guys. Full-on spoilers. You know the way they introduced Batman and how he kind of came out of that alleyway with the footsteps and everything?
Yeah.
I was watching that scene and I'm thinking in my head, how much better would that scene have been if, the footsteps come out and it's not Batman, it's someone else. And then, all the gang members was kind of like, it's not really him. And then, boom, Batman just shows up from behind and takes some guy out. And then,
yeah, see, that's an interesting thing, because let me ask you this question, right? You're talking about like the stealth Batman, right?
Yes.
Versus like the Terminator, like head on, front force, like here I am, Batman. So here's the question. The scene opened up with the voiceover, right? And the idea of the diary is a great idea, right? As a detective, as a psychological thing, year 1 versus year 55, if this guy's chronicling everything, diaries everything, and he's solving clues, it makes sense that he's documenting things and then later on going back to details that maybe he wouldn't realize would be important, but they are, right? So the diary aspect of it, that itself is a good idea, right? Because it's almost like he's analytically, chronologically details of his process, right? So it's like, okay, that makes sense. The fact that he read it in the way that he read it for the voiceover, like they think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows. Do you think that was effective, or do you think it would have been more effective if you take out that voiceover, right? And then to your point of what you're saying, they took the approach in that voiceover of him stating, they think I'm everywhere, but I can't be something to the effect that he can't be everywhere at once. So he has to pick and choose where he shows up, right? And then they kind of like show 2 or 3 different criminals where they're faked out. and just off of the fear, they're tripping themselves up, right? Do you think that was the most effective route? Or, to your point, do you think it would have been effective of without the voiceover, you hear the sounds of the city, right? You know, just sounds, no, not necessarily a musical score, but just the sounds of the city and what's going on. And then you see these 2 or 3 criminals in different situations, right? We don't really have a sense of time, but you see them get caught by Batman from the shadows in different ways. Like maybe one's a battering, the other one his feet get tied up, the other guy gets swiped, you know, by the shadow that crosses the screen.
Yes, man.
And then eventually you see a scene where he's actually revealed for a bigger threat with multiple criminals, right? So do you think that would have been more effective? Whereas they took the idea of I can't be everywhere at once, but they think I'm everywhere at once, which is okay, that's a good idea. Or do you take it of, well, show us glimpses of Batman through 2 or 3 different criminals of different tactics, and then show us the reveal of Batman that's leading up to within like a 2-minute sequence?
No, I think the voiceover thing was good because, you know, this is a whole new Batman, and I think, you know, you need to establish him for this movie, you know, because we don't really know much about this particular take, because Matt Reeves made a different Batman in this movie, man, because we're gonna go into that in the next section when we talk about Batman himself. But I think it was fine. They did go a little bit overboard later on with the voiceover, and I think it kind of took away, because I'm more of a show don't tell kind of guy. So I think the way they did it, they were on the right track. But I think, you know, this is why guys like Ridley Scott and James Cameron are so good, because a scene like you know what we just talked about, it would have played out like the way I said. Like, you wouldn't have expected Batman to come directly out like that, you know, because to me, I always
and also if he is coming directly out like that, right, which is, you would say, because you mentioned James Cameron, that's like the Terminator approach, right? This imposing figure, he's not saying much, he's supposed to be scary. You know the playground scene where the Terminator gets his clothes and the guys are kind of like making fun of him because he's like just this huge naked dude, and they like stab him or whatever, and then he gets his like jacket and his pants and everything, right?
Right. But what I'm saying is it's not even like the Terminator. What I'm saying is the sensibilities of how to handle characters and the situations that you put them in is a very hard skill to have, and I feel like that scene would have been so much more effective if you just did not see him coming. You know how much more scary that would have been? Because
like if you saw the criminals getting taken down from the shadows.
Yes, like one by one, and then at the end, like the last guy that's there, you see Batman. That would have been, I think that would have pulled that scene up a couple levels, man. It was a good scene. Don't get me wrong, I'm not, you know, knocking him for it. But I just feel like little touches like that, I think, would have pulled this movie from being good to like being a classic, man. Those are the things that matter. Little details like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you could even flow the cinematography smoother if you do what you're talking. Like for example, like the sound of the footsteps, right? That was an approach. That was different, right?
Listen, man, that was really... like RoboCop, man. The Merc said in his review, that was like RoboCop.
Actually, you're right, because RoboCop, you could hear his knees bending, you could hear the foot, you could hear every little motion, right? It's like very heavy, but it's like it kind of also felt like the Cowboy, where you hear the rattling of the star on the back of the boot, right? Yeah. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. It's a take, right? Okay, I like that aspect of it, to be honest. Like, I like hearing footsteps but not knowing where they're coming from. To me, that's a cool idea, right? But it could also be a giveaway of where you're coming from if the footsteps are that loud, right? Like they kind of know the direction. Okay, but fair enough, right? And you figure if it sounds that heavy, wouldn't you move around slower? Like, because you sound like you're wearing some heavy shoes, but maybe not. Maybe it just sounds that way. I mean, because I'm assuming it's like, if it sounds that heavy, you're going to be slower. But okay, fair enough. You have this type of approach. I liked it overall because it plays on the auditory sense of things, right? But to your point, like there's a scene in Batman the Animated Series where there's an episode where everybody thinks Batman's dead, right? And they have a reveal at the end of the episode where he shows up. But the way he shows up isn't, you don't just see him first, you see him at the end of a sequence. So for example, they hear thugs getting beaten up in the hallway, right? That auditory thing again, right? Which is similar to the boots. Like we hear somebody but we don't see them. It's kind of a powerful technique, right? So you hear there's trouble in the hallway, and then the gang, the crime kingpin, I think it was Thorpe or something like that, he takes out his gun from his desk because he hears something is coming. And the Sid character, who was the character everybody thought, I think they called the episode The Man with No Name. They thought this Sid guy, this like nerdy little guy, was the guy that was getting everybody in trouble. But he was saying it was like happenstance, the happenstance was Batman, right? It's just nobody knew he was doing what he was doing, and it was a setup, right, to get to the Thorpe guy. So they show the fear on his face, which is like if you have a group of criminals, you can show different versions of them being taken down from the shadows, and you can show the fear. It's kind of like what Batman Begins did with the Cillian Murphy scene, right? And to make it short, like essentially the scene ends with the doors getting blown open by a body going through the doors. We don't see Batman from that angle. We see Thor pull his gun. We see the batarang essentially be thrown. It hits the gun, and then we see Batman essentially entering the scene. The music's playing, etc. So it's like that's that final reveal. Like for the last guy left, he reveals, right? Like, okay,
Yes,
five
man.
guys, you're
That's what
taken
I'm
out,
talking about.
one left. Now I'm coming into the one-on-one interaction, right?
Yeah, I mean, my approach to Batman is that he should never be putting himself out front and center, man, because you're one
He put
dude.
himself in the middle, like he was getting hit in the back and turning around. Like he put himself in the middle of 7 guys, essentially, like for a beatdown. Like he put himself for like a punishment session.
So I think this is a good segue to go into our next part, because I want to talk about Batman in this movie, because I think we should begin by talking about Pattinson and his portrayal, because I really did. I mean, his performance in this wasn't bad. I just didn't feel like he really did much with it. He was kind of just there. You know what I mean? Like he did his thing, but he never really gave me something to really grab onto. Like I was expecting him to sort of lean more into a more unhinged kind of Batman, because the whole point of this new Batman is that he's just starting off, so he's kind of trying to manage his situation and his temperament and everything, and he didn't really seem like the performance was kind of like,
The trailers were a little misleading about that.
yeah, I don't want to say it was a bad performance, because I actually think, I'll be honest, man, I was tough on this guy from the beginning, because I didn't really feel like he was the right choice for me as Batman, but his performance was fine. I think it's more of a director kind of thing, because he really just moped around the entire time. Like I really wanted him to sort of a more of a character arc in this. You know, his Bruce Wayne was almost exactly like the Batman. We said this early on, like in one of our first, I think the first video we did, we hit the nail on the head, man. Like his Bruce Wayne was essentially the same as Batman. It wasn't that much different. He even had the same kind of voice.
The same look, the same body
The same
language.
look. And I mean, okay, so like, there's that. You know, I really don't think it's on Pattinson as an actor. I don't think it's his acting ability. I think it's just the direction that they took with this.
Yeah,
You
and I
know?
mean it's a direction that you can. For example, there's scenes where it works and there's scenes where it doesn't work, right? So
Yes,
for example,
exactly. Yes.
you like for example, the first time we see Batman in the crime scene, right? Like after the initial opening, and then Gordon puts a signal and he goes to investigate the Riddler's crime scene, right? That I think was one of the better Batman scenes that we've ever seen, because essentially he doesn't say anything. The cops don't want him there, but he's there, and like how many times have we seen that in a comic book or the animated series or any kind of interpretation of Batman? Like Batman on a crime scene, looking at the room and looking at different things. Like that's very Batman, and we've never.
Listen, man, I love the look on those people's faces when he walked in. Like the way the cops looked at this guy, like, what the hell is this guy?
Right, but the fact that he's also not verbally reactive, right? Like they're having their reaction, but he's essentially like quiet.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever played the new Doom games, but it's the same approach. Like when the Doom guy shows up and normal people see him, they're like, God damn, look at this guy. Everyone's like afraid of him.
Yeah, no, and it's more fearful if he's not saying anything.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it too. It was interesting because, like you said, we've never seen Batman like in a confined space among regular people as much as it's been in this film. So it was a little bit weird seeing that, man, because I've always felt like, you know, Batman should always have a way to get the hell out of there if something goes down, man. And I think for me, like, the way that Batman was done in this, there's a couple situations in the movie where I'm like, I understand you're new at this, but you should never let yourself get into that situation. A couple of them that come to mind is the fact that, like, later on in the film, Batman literally gets knocked out and gets captured and allows himself to get captured. That's like the first thing you do is like you cannot let yourself get captured if you're like a vigilante. You just you're finished.
Yeah, it shows lack of foresight, right? It shows a lack of utilizing Alfred. Because you know, a lot of times when Batman gets captured, or either there's some kind of defense mechanism on the suit, or you could bring in Alfred to sort of prevent that from happening.
You're right.
Because he knows where he is. He's tracking him. You know, he can. You know, later. I mean, there's communication. Like you could say he's tracking his body vitals, because there's some interpretations where Alfred knows a little bit of surgical work, you know, from Thomas Wayne, but also because Batman's getting, you know, essentially destroyed so many times that Alfred has to know some surgical stuff to save his life. But so later on, when it's more advanced, you know, he knows the vitals of the suit, he knows when he's unconscious, things like that. But if you want to make it simpler, they're talking to each other, and when he's not talking to him, he knows something's wrong, right? Something like that. But, or if you want to make it even simpler and you just take Alfred out of it, then some kind of something on the suit, right? Like even Batman 89, the Batmobile's alone, the shields go up.
Look, man,
you know,
I want to say this.
Was it? Do you remember Batman 89 where he's unconscious for like 2 seconds and someone goes to touch him and he kind of just comes to? Was it Vicky Vale, or was it a thug in the alleyway? Like he's on the ground. Remember somebody shoots him?
I think it was.
And he's on the ground.
I think it was.
And they go to take his.
Yeah, I think it was like one of the henchmen or something.
Yeah, it was a similar type of thing, but he doesn't wake up in the center of a police station with a bunch of cops around him. I mean, Gordon's there, so you figure Gordon will protect him from being unmasked and all that kind of stuff if he's so inclined, right? But
that's true, but you gotta remember, man, like Gordon was the only guy vouching for this guy. That whole police station, you tell me that none of those cops would have been like, you know,
yeah,
you walk by a room and like, oh,
stop them.
No, man, like, dude, can you imagine? Okay, let me just. There's a couple moments in this that shocked me.
I will say though that I think that works because it's the first film. Like, okay, he's a novice, he's making mistakes. Okay, to me, I could still buy into that. I still liked it. I didn't think anything of it. But if you do that for a second or third film, now you have an issue, because clearly a second or third film, he's not I don't care if it's year 3 or 4. He's not no novice no more, right? And he's been in that situation in the first film. So if he was in that situation in the first film, I would hope he's not in that situation in the second film.
There's some look, man. There's some weird stuff going on, because this is a film where Batman has technology of like this crazy like contact lens that you could put in your eye and record and see everything. But you tell me that like this dude doesn't have some sort of mechanism on his suit. When you touch him, you get like electrocuted, or like he's gotta have like at the end of the movie, this guy has some sort of like adrenaline shot that he uses to wake himself up.
Could be
me,
Venom. Never know. Could be Venom.
Yeah, it's like you should have some sort of like just route that into your body, so like if you ever get knocked out, you immediately wake back up. You know, I mean, it's just there's some inconsistencies there, and I think.
Well, let's also touch on about how he did get knocked up. Essentially, he took a bomb to the face. You know, like
That
with
is
the
another
timer,
one.
with the timer right in front of him going down, right?
Val,
like,
let me tell you, when I saw that scene, I
and,
was
and,
like,
the- and the-
why
and
didn't
his
you
jaw,
use your
fine.
cape? Use your cape. Use your cape. He uses his cape so many times in the games to block, like, explode. He knew it was coming. He never used his cape.
I mean, he took that. Like, we're not even talking about like you're in front of the. Like he was grabbing onto the guy and shaking him when the bomb went off, right? So we're talking about like you practically exploded as if
Listen.
you were that guy, right? You're
Dude.
as close as if you were that body.
That would have broken every bone in your body, dude. I don't care how much armor you're wearing. See, the fact, like, I understand this is a comic book film and it's a movie. You gotta suspend your disbelief, but like, see, the thing is, in the games, whenever there's like an explosion, he would use his cape to like cover himself up. I don't think he really used his cape at all in this film. Did he?
I mean, well, right after that, he. I want to get your impression of this. I liked it, but I know it could be a controversial take. Is that right after that, right? So it's obviously it's a three-part sequence, right? So he gets blown up by the bomb. He's unconscious. He wakes up within the police station with the cops surrounding him. Immediately gets off the table, starts pushing all of them off of him, right? Like, no, you know, if you would say he was just blown up, you probably wouldn't even realize if you missed that scene, right? So then he's running to the top, and the sequence essentially ends where he comes to the edge of the gargoyle. He takes a deep breath, like he puts on the suit, he flies off, he crashes again, and that's a pretty bad fall because he takes a little while to get back up, and then he kind of limps into the shadows. So I like that little bit of a breath, that choice to kind of have him be scared in that moment, because it was like, oh, okay, like, you know, Chris Nolan tried to do the Batman is real thing, right? But there was nothing that made you feel like he was like, oh, it's a real man, and, you know, essentially he's Batman, but he's just a human being. Like, that was Nolan's whole thing, right? Coming off of the, you know, Joel Schumacher Batman and the Burton Batman and all those Batmans. But to me, Keaton felt more real than Bale's Batman in '89 and Returns, and Pattinson feels more real than Bale's Batman in the Nolan films as well, right? And I think that's one of the moments why is that breath. Like, I think some people might have liked it, some people might have not liked it. I thought it was a good choice, but at the same time, there was something that was fake about the Nolan's version of this is the real guy that gets hurt just because he has a bad knee or just because he has this. You never really felt, I think, that I mean, there's the scene where he goes spelunking and he crashes and falls down the balcony, and you could argue this scene is kind of similar to that, but this scene, I feel like you felt it more because of that breath, because of the surprise of it. Like, I've never seen a Batman do that, right? I think the closest thing is maybe something similar to like Mask of the Phantasm, where you feel like he's a little bit more human at the beginning. But I thought Reeves handled that better, even though it's not my cup of tea. I'm in the fantasy camp of where you don't need to do that. But if you do want to make him seem more human, I think Reeves does it better than Nolan in that little sequence.
No, I agree with that, man. It's more of a taste thing, because I think like there's a part in this that it actually made me laugh, because I'm like, how the hell? So like, there's a part when Batman actually knocks on the door, and these guys open the door and Batman's standing there. I'm like, this guy's knocking on doors. I mean, it's funny, but to me, it's like I always pictured Batman to be like the guy that goes in from behind, or the back, or the roof.
Like,
but like,
for example, you know when we first see the Riddler in the mansion at the beginning in the shadows?
oh, that was good.
And
Yeah,
you just see the glare from his glasses. Very Batman thing. That's a very Batman. Not how he kind of and like lunges forward with the shovel, but before he does that, right? Like when he's just standing there and his eyes are going left to right, kind of a very Batman thing.
Yeah, no,
And creepy.
there's a lot of really good parts in this movie, but I feel like there's some very like it's very mixed. Anyway, man, I just feel like to me there was an inconsistency in the approach here. And it's interesting to see.
You mentioned the knocking on the door, that like when he confronts like the twin security guards.
Yeah, do you know how crazy that is? The fact that like I mean, all these criminals in the city like know the reputation of Batman. And this guy just knocks on the front door. And he opens the door and he's standing there. That's crazy to me. I mean, what's to stop them from pulling this guy in there, ganging up on him, and just like unmasking him? You know, it's a weird thing because it's just like it's a choice that they made. But I don't know. For me, as a Batman guy, I don't really think it didn't feel like that would be like the smartest approach to take for this. It just kind of pulled me out of the movie, you know. Val, you there?
Yeah. I'm here. No,
Oh, okay.
it was a strange thing. I didn't have an issue with it. Again, just because I felt like, okay, so they're clearly doing the inexperienced Batman, right? Okay, like that. They're clearly relying on the fact that you will buy into this as an audience because this is year 2 and this Batman is inexperienced, and we're not doing fantasy, we're doing real world, and in real world he's just a human being and he gets hurt and this and that. So here's the thing, the element of Batman getting hurt is a huge part of the Batman comics, because the pain in him getting hurt is the only thing that lets you see his will when he pushes through pain, right? Like there's this the Bane arc, the Nightfall arc, where he goes through all this physical, mental, emotional, and psychological like gauntlet, right? And you see him broken down, and you see him over time like worn out, and you see him getting concussions, and you see him like dealing with like holding his breath in the water, and then he's coming up, and then he's almost gonna lose consciousness, and he has to go do something before he passes out. Like that's all pain, right? That's all human thing, pain, will, pushing through it. So you need pain, and you need him getting hurt in a way to show his will and him pushing through. So from that standpoint, I like that element in this film because I think he shows it better than any other Batman, including Nolan's realistic trilogy. So that really appealed to me from that sense. But like I said before, that only works for me. Like you know the wide shots where Batman's in the middle of a bunch of criminals and he's fighting everybody at the same time, and he'll punch one guy in front of him, another guy will hit him in the back, he'll turn around, he'll punch that guy, another guy will hit him in the back, he'll turn around and punch that guy. Like essentially, he's aware of the guy behind him because the guy behind him's already struck him in the back of the head, right? Or he's aware of a guy on the balcony because they already shot him with a shotgun. Or he's aware of a guy below him because that guy already kind of reached out for him. So he's not very good at being aware of where everybody is as a martial artist until he gets hit, right? Which is like, okay, fine, fair enough. He's inexperienced. You want to show this in the first film. Okay, fair enough. It shows the pain, it shows the will better than any other Batman film. But when you go to a second film, when you go to a third film, if this guy is actually intelligent, if he knows how to fight, if he's strategic, I mean, it doesn't take a martial artist to say, I don't want to dive into the middle of seven guys with shotguns, right? And obviously you have batarangs for a reason, you have grappling hook for a reason, you have the ninja thing for a reason, the shadows for a reason, right? Like he made the whole speech, the whole voiceover of, they think I'm, hiding in the shadows. No, I am the shadows. You're not the shadows if you're in the middle of 8 guys.
That's what I mean. It's an inconsistency. It's an inconsistency.
It's inconsistent. Yeah, and it's like, part of me likes it because I didn't. So I always thought when I watched the Nolan realism thing, right? Because he's the one that introduced that take. I always thought I don't like the realism thing because I didn't like what I was seeing, what Nolan was doing with it, but I didn't have anything to compare. Right, all the other Batman are fantastical, and I love the fantastical version because of atmosphere and because of texture and because of visuals. So when Nolan came as like the prototype example of hyper realism, right? I always thought, no, I don't like this, because I thought it stripped everything of the fantastical, the atmosphere, the texture, the setting.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. I agree.
This film takes place on Halloween, right? When it opens up, kind of like The Long Halloween, which is very similar to what Burton would do. Even though his films weren't Halloween, his films were always Halloween, right? Like his visuals were Nightmare Before Christmas. All these movies, very Halloween movies, right? So the thing is, it didn't feel right. It didn't resonate when Nolan did hyperrealism. But when in Reeves' version of realism, I don't have a problem with it, because it's almost like, in a weird way, the pain feels more real. The mistakes feel more real. I feel this guy could actually get hurt. I didn't feel like Bale as Batman Bruce Wayne, I felt was going for hyperrealism in presentation visually, but was functioning as a comic book guy, right? Like it was not hitting. It just wasn't working. Whereas with this, it feels like it's hitting, but he doesn't sacrifice the setting. He doesn't sacrifice the visuals. He doesn't sacrifice atmosphere. He doesn't sacrifice
I agree 100%. 100%.
That's all there. And you remember we had an earlier talk, and I mentioned the rubber ducky from Batman Returns.
Yes, I remember that.
So I mentioned visuals for this reason, right? I always say, like, Batman belongs in a setting of strong visuals. Whether you say you want to do pure fantasy, which is where I am at, or you say you want to do hyperrealism, I don't care. Do hyperrealism, but strong visuals is separate from those two things, right? Because you're either going to have them or you're not. For example, you remember the criminal with like the plant Halloween mask? That, like, at the beginning of the movie where he gets hit by a car because he thinks Batman's in the shadows?
Yes, I remember that.
So I had mentioned, in an earlier video we did, is Batman the character the same if you take all the outfits away from the villains, if you take the duck away from Batman Returns? My point is that sequence the same if the guy is not wearing that little weird mask and he's just dressed as a regular dude, like literally just like a dude in a leather jacket? Do you lose something in that scene? And I think you do, because you have to show the anonymity of Gotham, and you have to show how crazy and weird and psychotic Gotham is, and you have to make it stylistic. Batman is stylistic, so like it's weird because that guy doesn't say anything. He's scared. He looks at the shadows. He gets hit by a car, right? But the fact that he's wearing that mask gives him a little bit of a character. You know what I mean? Like, everybody you see in Gotham should be a character. Like, I don't mean character like in like a exposition type of sense or backstory. I mean character that the moment you see them, you visually have a character. Like, what, like, you remember the realistic Batman villains? Like, you remember the guy with the scars, Mr. Zsasz, or you remember the one that was really tall, the Hangman with the two machine guns?
You talking about the animated series?
No, the comic books in Nightfall, in the Nightfall series.
Oh no, I haven't delved into that aspect of Batman myself. I've just seen the movies.
So essentially, like, they're two minor B characters, right? They're B characters. You see them maybe for one or two stories, and they're never really like a main villain. But when you see them visually, right? One of them, he's a guy that uses knives, right? And for everybody he kills, he marks a tally on his body, right? So at some point, and he's called Mr. Zsasz, but at some point, he's got so many bodies that he's tallied up from head to toe, right? So
I think they had that guy in the Arkham Asylum game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was probably in there.
Because I remember there was a dude that you say that, like, does he have scars all over his body?
Yeah. No, he has scars all over his body. He uses knives, that kind of thing. He's just like a regular guy. But the thing is, he's a hyper realistic character, right? He's supposed to be like a serial killer. He's supposed to be a guy that uses knives.
Right.
It shows off Batman's hand-to-hand combat, because a lot of times when they fight, he knocks the knives out of his hands, with kicks or with blocks or with punches and that kind of thing. Like the guy has knives, Batman's barehanded, and because he's a martial artist, he negates the knives that the guy is using, right? So the thing is, though, it's a visual character, because of the extreme of him being tallied from head to toe. If you take away the tallies, or you just give him one tally on the shoulder, you don't get the visual character. It doesn't hit you hard,
That's
right?
what I'm saying. Like, I've always said that, man. Like, I think more than any other character, I think the visuals and the images and the way that Batman has been portrayed in the comics, a lot of what makes him what he is the artistic aspect of it. And I just want to say that I feel like out of all the Gotham cities that I've seen in movies, I think this may be the best looking one that I've seen. Because it's interesting because it has its like fantastical look to it, but at the same time, it seemed like a legitimate city, like somewhat like a place that actually exists. But
yeah,
I think
no, it feels grounded and it feels real, but
yes,
it's not lazy. Like Nolan was lazy. Like, okay, we could say Nolan had good production value. He did. Cinematography, great cinematographer, great lighting, right?
But compared to the visuals in this, your Reeves, it's way better. It's way better.
Yeah, no, but because the thing is, to have production value, right, you just have to be a technically sound director. So like, if you know your cinematographer is well picked, your film is going to look good. If you know the lighting is on point, the film is going to look good atmospherically. And if you're using good cameras and lenses, Nolan likes to use IMAX level cameras for big projection. The film from a technical standpoint is going to look good. But the thing is, Nolan is lazy in his setting. He sets it in Chicago. He doesn't change Chicago. He sets it in New York or London. He doesn't change the city, right? So the production value is high, but the imagination is low, right? So the thing is, with Reeves, to his credit, he wasn't lazy about that. Like, they picked a specific look, similar to how Nolan had a specific look, and Burton had a specific look, and they've all had a specific look, right? So they've all had their cinematographer and the way that they went. But the difference is that, and look, Matt Reeves shot in London. Matt Reeves shot in a lot of the similar places that Nolan shot in. He didn't shoot in some other cities, obviously because of COVID. They had to do more set design and things like that at certain parts. But my point is that he wasn't lazy. He tried to make it look like a Gotham. He didn't just make it look like the city he was shooting in, right? Like, he gave it some kind of atmosphere that kind of makes me feel this is like in between what Burton did and in between what Nolan did, but it's more effective than Nolan. Like, if we're talking Gotham, if we're talking just like cinematography, like, forget characters, if we're talking just Gotham, it's more effective than what Nolan did 100%. And it's a mix between Nolan and Burton. And then if you choose this or if you choose Burton, it just depends on what sensibility you have, but they're both equally strong in terms of atmosphere.
No, I agree 100%. There were times when I was watching this movie where, like, I could not believe what I was seeing, because it literally looked like a comic book come to life. There are parts of this game that look like scenes from Arkham, like the Arkham games. Like, this is ridiculous, man. And the thing is, like, you said they filmed this where in London? You said?
Well, I think some of it was Glasgow, some of it was some other areas. They went for like more Victorian and Gothic architecture, but they didn't really shoot. I mean, because look, Batman '89 and Batman Returns, they created a miniature set, right? So yeah. that Gotham was built, right? So I mean, like, there's a reason that Gotham is like completely unfamiliar, because it was essentially built by a designer, right? But Nolan did on-location shooting, and Reeves did on-location shooting. The difference is, Reeves wasn't lazy when it came to his setting, right? He didn't just rely on technical production design and the lenses and the camera, and essentially that's good enough. Like, we don't need to put anything on top of it to make it look like Gotham, right? Like, and again, I don't just say this for Batman. I think this is true for Spider-Man. I think this is true for Superman and Metropolis. I don't think just because Spider-Man is in New York City, you just shoot New York City. I think you shoot New York City, but use some imagination to make it seem a little bit like a Spider-Man world, or like a New York City specific to him, right? So the thing is, Reeves just put in more effort. Like you could feel it. Like, you could feel it when you're watching the Batman, and I don't know all the areas of this Gotham, but I know this Gotham has a lot of areas I want to see.
It felt like a real place. And I think that was the craziest part, because
but it feels like a real place that you haven't seen. Like, you
Yeah,
know what
like
I
I
mean?
couldn't even, as I'm watching this, I'm like, I couldn't, in my mind, I was trying to figure out like, where did they, like, I couldn't picture like any city that looks like this. Like it looked like a unique place, and that added so much to the movie for me. Because everyone knows like, Gotham is a crazy city, man. Like if you look at the way that it was portrayed in Batman '89, like the whole gothic look, and you know it's always raining. Like there were parts of this that it felt like Blade Runner. It felt like just like the best like noir movie that you've seen. Like I have to give him credit where credit is due, because Matt Reeves has always been good at this, and this is the reason why at the beginning when they announced that he was going to be doing Batman, I was like, oh yes, 100%, because I've seen Planet of the Apes and I've seen what this guy can do. He has the artistic visual sensibility to bring out the best in Batman, and it showed. It showed in this. My only real complaint about the visuals were like, I had some issues with the way that his costume looked in certain shots, man. So
Yeah, it looked good. It looked really good in some scenes, and in other scenes, not so much.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag because again,
like there were some scenes where it looked really good. Like when he came into the crime scene and the cop has the hand on his chest, it looked good. The suit, pretty much in that scene.
And it goes back to, I mean, we said this early on. I feel like they showed him a bit too much. There's a lot of scenes in this film where he's just standing and there's nothing behind him, and you see the silhouette. And the thing is, like, the cowl doesn't look great. It doesn't look great, man. You know, it doesn't ruin the film, but I feel like a lot of points in the movie I'm watching this and I'm like, it would be so much better if he looked a little bit better, man. It would be so much better.
Do you know the scene where and you're right, because you can hide deficient, like Batman '89, that's not a perfect suit by any means, right? But the way it's shot, it's hidden by darkness in some scenes and lit in other ways in other sides of the suit. So like Batman '89, Batman Returns, they hide the weaknesses of the suit as much as they can to like show off the strengths of the suit. But if you were to see that suit in a behind the scenes while they're filming, without the trickery, sort of say, right, or the lighting or the shadow play, you would see the deficiencies. Whereas with this, yeah, you're right. Sometimes you're just standing right there, and there's no hiding half of it with shadow and showing other sides of it with lighting. It's just he's just there. So it's like the whole room is lit, and you see the suit from the angles that are good and then the angles that are bad, all at the same time. So you're kind of like a mixed feeling about it. But you know, with the beginning where he reveals himself and you hear the footsteps.
Yeah.
The whole thing with the suit and the whole thing with like, because I think if you compare Batman films, right, it's easy to compare. Like for me, it's easy to discount the Nolan films and compare the Batman to the Burton films. Because I look at, like before, I would look at Burton fantasy good, Nolan realism bad. Whereas now I look at it like Burton fantasy great, the Matt Reeves Batman realism good, right? And I look at that, I kind of replaced Nolan with Reeves, right? And I kind of like, okay, well, this is my example of the hyper realistic Batman that makes sense to me for that take, versus Nolan going for that but not really hitting that, right? It
sort of feels like this isn't the film that Nolan was trying to make, but because he didn't have that, he doesn't have that that, I don't know what you would call it.
You know what it is? He didn't know how to place Batman into a realistic world and have it not be a negative thing. It hugely negatively affected his Batman. Whereas Reeves places his Batman in a hyper-realistic world, but he doesn't get rid of the fantasy completely, because, and that's my question that I was going to ask you, is that scene when he walks out where you hear the footsteps, because Reeves kind of went like 85% hyper-realism, and then he kind of went like the other 25% fantasy, right? Whereas Nolan tried to go 100% realism and get rid of the fantasy, but then you got a guy dressed up as a bat. So it doesn't make sense. Like, you're negatively now impacting your Batman because he doesn't fit in this movie.
Basically he distilled it down to the point where it just had nothing left, and you might as well just take him out of that Batman costume and make him like a soldier, which I think
Yeah,
is what it felt like at times. But with this, I think it's a very, very good balance of being realistic enough and overlapping with the fantasy aspects of Batman. I think that is the strongest part of this movie for me.
yeah, and you see it. You know, obviously we don't see Bruce Wayne a lot, right? There's only a couple scenes, but you know the scene where Alfred is doing the crossword puzzle and Bruce Wayne comes in with the sunglasses and he kind of looks hungover.
Oh man, listen, man, like this guy looked like a junkie, man.
He looked like a junkie, right? Because
He
he's
looked
pale
terrible.
white. The
He
dude
looked
is
terrible.
white as hell, right? But the funny thing is, like, I think that that scene really reveals a lot of why I think it worked, right? Which is, and what I hope we see more of going forward when it comes to Bruce Wayne, because um you would agree the Bruce Wayne in the Nolan films, I think, is probably the best Bruce Wayne we've ever seen from the Playboy Bruce Wayne, right? Like the whenever I throw Batman out of it and I talk just Bruce Wayne, to me the best Playboy Bruce Wayne was Christian Bale, right? Specifically in
Yeah, I
Batman
agree with that.
Begins.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in certain parts of Dark Knight, and then as they went on to the third film, not so much because you just put him in the desert somewhere and it became something a little bit different, right? But the thing is though, when I see Bruce Wayne in Nolan's like Dark Knight, he's in a penthouse, right? So the problem with a penthouse, right, is that like it doesn't quite scream billionaire, right? So the thing is, and it doesn't really differentiate like his character. Like one of the great things about this movie is that the settings really differentiate the characters. You see Penguin at the Iceberg Lounge. It really colors the Iceberg Lounge, but then it really colors the Penguin too. You see Riddler, and we're gonna get to it later on, Joker in Arkham. It really colors Arkham, but then it really colors the Riddler and the Rogues Gallery as well. So it's the same thing with Batman and Alfred, right? So like Alfred is colored by the mansion, and the mansion colors Alfred. Batman's colored by the cave, and the cave colors Batman. Now, Batman Begins had a mansion, and it was very strong because of it, right? Batman 89, Batman Returns, they had the Wayne Manor, and it was very strong because of it. They also both had the cave, right? From Batman Begins to Dark Knight, they got rid of the manor, and they put him in a penthouse, right? Like some regular penthouse. Like you could tell us this is like billionaire Bruce Wayne's penthouse, but you know what? When I'm looking at it, it looks like a regular room, right? And then they stripped the cave, so they put him underneath the penthouse with all these white lights in something that looks like a warehouse, right? And
They
then you have
kept
Tumblr.
they kept reducing him down.
They kept reducing them down, and they literally stripped it, right? So it didn't work because you lost everything, right? So with Reeves, it's not a manor, it's a Wayne Tower, and it's not the cave, it's the railroad station. But the thing about it is, even though he does that like Nolan did that, right? When I'm inside the tower, I feel like I'm in a Gothic castle. So I'm not. If you didn't tell me this was Wayne Tower, and that scene where he comes out with the sunglasses and Alfred's at the dinner table and he's doing the crossword puzzle, I would assume, because this is what it looks like, that this is Wayne Manor, because it doesn't look like some tower penthouse. It's actually like a cathedral almost, right? And then if you looked at the railroad station, yeah, he changed that from the cave, but he put in bats, he made it big, he put in shadows and darkness. So it's
Listen,
like, if you
man, when
didn't
I
tell
saw
me it was a railroad station, I could still kind of maybe feel like, kind of feels like a cave, right? So Reeves did this like tricky thing, you know?
I texted half hope before I saw the film. Listen, man, I'm about to go in, man. If I don't see bats, I'm gonna have a problem. And then I saw bats I saw bats in that cave, in that railway station. I was like, oh, I'm happy now.
Yeah, and we had a really cool scene where he actually is looking through the crime scene, and he's like, "What is that? A mouse?" He's like, "Not this one,"
Oh
because
yes, 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 yes.
it was a bat. He actually came face to face with a bat. I thought that was a nice touch, because it's like, yeah, let's give the bat some love, right? Like, this is the Batman movie. Let's actually show a bat, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I want to just talk about some of the standouts in this, some of the characters, man, because for me, across the board, I think it was pretty good, man. I just feel like there's a couple standouts, man. Colin Farrell in this was incredible. I just want to say that, man, because the guy basically, I can't even imagine like a better penguin than this. Like it was like pulled straight from the.
Well, do you like it? Do you like it more than Danny DeVito's penguin? Do you like him equal? Do you like one less? How would you compare it?
Well, it's that Danny DeVito situation was a crazy thing, man. I don't even know how. Like, I think Tim Burton's sick in the head, man. But yeah. As far as like the penguins that I've seen in all the games and everything, and in the movies, this was probably the best one. Like, he was funny, he was making me laugh, he had personality, his banter with Batman was excellent, the way that he sort of blended into that role. I didn't even know that was Colin Farrell, if you didn't tell me.
Yeah, no, he was really lost in the role. I think the scene where they're at the Iceberg Lounge and Batman goes to question the Penguin or Oz.
Yeah.
And it's like the first time I think he sees him, so like Catwoman's kind of serving something and she's coming in and out, and Batman's kind of noticing her while talking to Oz.
Yeah.
So that scene, like if I had to use a case study for the movie and pick only, like if you said pick only one scene and just dive in on that one scene for this movie, right? That's the scene I would use to make a couple of points. And the first one is the performance of Colin Farrell as Oz in that scene. I think, like, where he kind of shoves him into the wall, and Oz makes that offhand comment about the girl, and he says, "What, too soon?" And he kind of gives this like devilish smirk, and Batman's kind of like pissed off, right?
Yeah.
Like it makes Oz kind of seem like a predator, but it makes him look like a villain, right? Which is another point, right? The whole realism thing. Would you say that Jim Carrey's Riddler was sinister?
I mean,
like, would you say you picked up on like a sinister nature of the way Jim Carrey portrays the Riddler in certain parts of Batman Forever? Or would you say there was no sinisterism?
To be honest, he was just being Jim Carrey. To be honest.
I mean, yeah, for a large part of it, he was Jim Carrey, but there were moments where he had sinister moments.
He had
right?
sort of a I mean, the way that he was portrayed in that was kind of an interesting way, because like the first half of the performance was kind of just sort of I got the sense of here's a guy who is really troubled, and he's got like sort of a jealousy aspect to him, and he's kind of going through some shit, and when that switch flips, he kind of just becomes Jim Carrey at that point, which I think it's great for the role, but yeah, I mean it's Jim Carrey at that point.
Well, so the reason I bring it up, right? Because like when I think of Batman Rogues galleries, right? I think when you do the realism thing and you go like, okay, this guy's like a serial killer, this girl's a cat burglar, and you're doing like realistic takes, right? You have to find a way to get to the fantastical villainous aspect of the character. So, for example, that dialogue, that exchange between Oz and Batman, Oz was villainous, right? In that moment, he was offhanded comment, too soon, like he was being a little like the line delivery with the smirk and with the way his face looked. It was a villainous thing, and the thing is, Joker in '89 and Returns didn't really have a villainous aspect. He was more of like a lovable rogue, right? He was like a lovable rogue that was entertaining, but he didn't have like a sinister, villainous expression, right? Danny DeVito in Batman Returns did have a villainous, sinister expression, while also keeping like the humor of like Jack Nicholson Joker, but being more villainous, right? Like, you remember the scene with Catwoman where he's like, "You minx, you sphinx, you this, you that," and then he just hooks her to the umbrella and she goes flying over Gotham, and then she just drops on the garden house and like screams because she's just like lost one of her lives or whatever, right? Very villainous penguin, right? But he plays it humorly at the same time. Like, how she's flying up and the camera's looking down on him, and he's like, "Bye bye, my love, goodbye, like angel, like be the
Listen,
die
man.
in heaven." Like, it was villainous, but it was humorous at the same time. The same thing with where they're talking in his apartment and he's like threatening the cat and she's threatening the bird, and he's being villainous, right? He's like, oh yeah, and he's petting the cat, and then the knife comes out of the umbrella, right? So I feel they had it. I feel Oz had it. I feel Paul Dano, I don't feel he had it. Okay, we'll get to the good part. We'll get to the good parts of his performance and the bad parts, but I don't feel he had the villainous aspect. I think Carmine Turturro as Falcone had it in a very like quiet way. I would say Carmine Falcone, Turturro played villainous the same way Keaton played Batman, right? Like it's subtle, but it's there, right? It's just understated. So I think he did a really great job. But then when you look at like Heath Ledger's Joker, also not much villainous there. It was sort of like Nicholson's Joker in the sense of it was eccentric, it was flamboyant, he was a lovable rogue, but it was more like a genius and less like a sinister villain. And then you look at Tom Hardy, there really wasn't a villainous aspect there. It just kind of felt like a mad scientist, right, with the voice and this and that, but he wasn't, you didn't feel like villain, right? So in that one scene with Oz, you feel villain, but the cool thing is because he's in the iceberg lounge and because Batman's doing his Batman thing and he's interrogating him, at the same time that he's interrogating him, you have Catwoman coming in and out, and you have Batman noticing clues like a detective, right? So
Yes, man.
So that's really cool, and it's really cool because the setting is an iceberg lounge which the Penguin runs. So you're under this idea of, oh, I don't know who's going to be in here, what criminals, what villains, what like good guys, what bad guys. It's a club, so like anybody could be in here, and they go through like one by one, like identifying the DA and identifying like the whole DA's office is here, and like all the people that could go in and out of a club, and then you kind of hear Carmine Falcone through Batman's POV through Selina without actually seeing him when he touches her face, and then later on you actually see him, right? So it's like that's a nice first introduction to his character. But if you weren't in the Iceberg Lounge, you wouldn't be able to have such a strong introduction of Carmine Falcone as a shadowy figure that happens to be among all these other shadowy figures, and he's just like the biggest predator. And there's some kind of past between him and Selina that we don't know what it is, but Batman's kind of viewing it and he's getting an idea of there is some kind of history there, right? So it's like that setting allowed for those scenes to function so well, and it's like, well, that's why you need a Batcave, because Alfred, you know, talking to Bruce in a huge cave is kind of paternal, because it's like this dark, huge space that's like rainy and filled with bats and like cold, and the setting like colors that interaction, right? And I mean, I'm sure it's probably like really weird for a $1 billion butler to be in a cave like that, right? Wearing like a fancy suit and a vest with the gold trays and all the like whatever comes from the mansion upstairs. It's like
I mean, he's probably used to the weirdness by now, so that's probably pretty tame in his standards.
Yeah, but essentially, like, he's like a fish out of water, right? Like this proper British gentleman that's like, yeah, for Batman the cave is his home. For Alfred, it's like out of water, right? It's like awkward, right? In a way.
Yes. That's what you're saying.
And so that dichotomy always works really well. Whereas the same thing with when you have Wayne Manor and Bruce Wayne is like this fake billionaire in a manor, he's a fish out of water because he'd rather be in the cave. Right? So it's like
that's kind of why. Yeah, I want to talk about that aspect because I really didn't feel like Batman enjoyed being Batman in this, and I've always gotten the feeling that, like, even from the Keaton movies, that this guy, he loves being Batman.
Oh, he had so many smirk moments, right? When he's Batman,
listen,
like so many smirks.
He is sitting like that scene at the beginning of Batman Returns when he's sitting there in the dark, just bored out of his mind, hoping that signal goes off. The way that he looks up when that signal turns on, it's like, man, it's go time. I've been waiting all day. Let's go, baby.
Yeah, the motivation. I think you're noticing that that was like a more defined motivation, whereas this one feels like teenage rage against the machine, but he doesn't have that motivation yet, which a lot of people would say he gets at the end of the film, but we could talk about that, you know, later on.
Yeah,
it felt a little off.
Yeah, it felt very tacked on. I mean, like it didn't feel earned in my opinion. Um, just because of the entire movie, this guy was literally moping around the entire movie. He felt like he just did not want to even. He didn't feel like he wanted to deal with his Bruce Wayne life or his Batman life. You know, it kind of felt like he was just doing this because he
Like he
needed
didn't
to
want to
do
be in
this,
the movie.
or like, he didn't want to be on the movie.
No, I mean
Uh,
I know he did, but you know, in a weird
yeah.
about way, it kind of feels like you're like 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 which one of these characters do you want to be, and like, are you going to be moping in the next Batman film? Like, or are you really going to be like diving into it and really excited to be Batman? You know?
No, I think yeah, you're right. You're right because for me, it just like what I said earlier, man. I felt like his performance was very baseline. There was no really there was no peaks and valleys in performance of like, okay, yeah, I'm doing the whole Batman thing now, so like, I'm gonna switch off to a completely different sort of personality. There wasn't any kind of switch like that, and
Well, let me ask you this, right?
yeah,
Because um, you said it's very baseline, right?
uh
I've
huh,
always I've always felt, at least I don't know about Bruce Wayne. You could take a couple different interpretation of Bruce Wayne, right? Maybe you want the billionaire playboy, maybe you don't. Maybe you want him to be more on the political scene, maybe you want him to be an eclectic outside loner, maybe you want him to be kind of a mix of a little bit of everything as like Keaton was. But you could go a lot of different ways with Bruce Wayne, right? Because essentially it's a mask. So that mask could be a lot of different things. It's just your preference of what you want it to be. But when you say his Batman was baseline, right? Like, to me, Batman has always been almost, and I think this is why I like the fantasy, the stylisticness, and the visualness of Batman, is that it's almost like a cipher or an imagery type of character. For example, like, to me, the best Batmans have been the Batmans that have said the least. So they've been the introverted Batman. So like, I place Keaton's Batman number 1, I place Pattinson's Batman number 2, I place Val Kilmer's Batman number 3, and then, like, to me, the worst of the worst Batmans is Bale, even though I think he's the best Bruce Wayne, right? It's just, I think that was his strength, but the Batman was his weakness. So it was baseline, but with Batman, to me, less is more. And to really like hit that point home is that when I say fantasy, when I say stylism, imagery, when I say like symbolism, when I say those things, you don't need a performance for, like, you're playing an archetype, so you don't need a performance. So if you were watching a scene and a robber is like robbing a girl, right, and you're seeing like something chaotic happen, right, he's like stealing her purse, he's like threatening her, he's doing whatever, right, it kind of happened in Returns. And in Returns, Batman shows up, gets out of the car, like knocks out the guy, and she gets her item back, or her papers, right? Catwoman gets her papers back, right? But if you didn't do it that way, to show how minimal Batman can be, or how baseline Batman can be, is that if you had a sequence and you're working off like visual storytelling and less is more, you could actually show us a sequence as a director where here's a woman, here's a criminal, they're struggling and fighting for her purse. He goes to knife her or whatever, and you see a black gauntlet covered hand from out of the frame come into the frame, grab that guy's hand, squeeze it, he drops his weapon, and he's like breaking the guy's wrists. Now, that's as minimalist as it gets, but there's no performance from the actor, right? So when you say baseline, like, that's Batman because you recognize his hand, right? And that's a very Batman action because he just neutralized that threat in a very efficient way. But as a viewer, all you saw was a black glove covered hand, gauntlet with the blades covered hand, go from out of the frame to into the frame to stop, the evil like thief from doing what he's doing with the woman's bag or whatever. And the shot was stationary except for Batman's hand coming into the frame. So I
uh huh.
think less is more when it comes to Batman, because even what I just described, the actor did absolutely nothing in that scene, but you could see it working, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, for me, it's an issue of like He demonstrates many times throughout the movie that he almost loses control a couple times in this. The first time when he's beating up that kid, and then at the end of the movie when he's punching that Riddler minion guy. So I feel because of the way they're portraying that he's sort of on the edge, I was expecting them to do more of that. I mean, I get the fact that Batman has to sort of be reserved because of that's you have to operate at a certain level to be able to survive. But for the early years of this movie, and the fact that they kept using that aspect of his vengeance, it felt a little bit like he could have done more with that and have more of an arc.
I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I just felt like from them to go from him at the beginning of the film to like saving people at the end of the movie and carrying kids and like holding a kid's hand at the end that before he lets him go, it didn't feel like a natural transition for me.
Yeah, it wasn't smooth, and like the thing is too, like how you mentioned the angry version of him pummeling the guy, and then the angry version of him doing it again at the end of the film, right? And then you mentioned the subdued version of him that you see in the funeral, that you see when the Riddler's telling him Bruce Wayne, and he looks at the camera, and then he kind of gives that mopey like funeral look, as he kind of looks like, oh, I've been found out, let me withdraw and look down at the floor, right? Like that kind of mopey emo vibe, right? But even those scenes, it doesn't flow, because so the Riddler scene, he does both in the same scene, right? Within the same scene, he does the mopey thing where he kind of blinks his eyes a couple times, he looks at the ground, and he after he looks at the camera and the guy's saying Bruce Wayne, and he's kind of like, oh no, I've been found out, this is emo me. But then at the same time, in the same scene, he gives you the anger banging on the glass, what have you done? And it's in the same scene. And there's no flow between those two versions, which essentially are the totality of his Batman, right? Like throughout the whole movie, he's either the mopey emo, or he's the angry rageful, or he's just like standing still and not doing anything, right? But in that scene, you see both of those in the same scene, and you see like, where's the middle of this? Like, how do you get from this mopey emo, look at the ground, to this angry rageful Batman? And then like, now you could argue, I know somebody out there is probably going to argue, oh, he was doing that because he was saying Bruce Wayne over and over, and he reverted to who he is as Bruce Wayne even though he was in the outfit, right? That this is like the Bruce. Okay, fair enough, but is your Bruce Wayne just the guy that's looking at the floor just going like emo, sad grief? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, because then you figure like, someone that's that depressed, like, I don't know, he's on Prozac, he's on drugs, whatever he's very depressed, right? Yeah. Are you the same guy that has the energy to be Batman? Like, are you telling me one moment you're still grieving you can't be Batman if you're still grieving your parents' death. You can only be Batman if you've gotten past the grief of your parents' death. And the reason is psychologically, because if the character of Batman is in grieving mode, right? If Bruce Wayne is in grieving mode, right? Then that means you're in depression. And if you're in depression, you're not in a state of action, right? Or state of thought. You're in a state of brokenness in a way. You're not going to function in any kind of sense. Right. So the point of Batman is that he used being Batman to get past his grief and his depression and all those things, because it motivated him to become actionable. And that's why when he sees other characters, he's proactive, right? Batman's not a character that just sits there. He's a character that moves, that does what he can do. He goes to his parents' graves, he put a rose, whatever, like something to show that he's gotten past the death of his parents, right? Obviously he honors them and he does what he does as Batman, in some interpretations in their service and the crime that took their lives, whatever. But you picture Batman talking to, you remember in certain animated series, he talks to a psychologist, that woman that's a psychologist or whoever it is. And even in Arkham, you'll see signs where Batman he's as good of a psychologist as anybody else, right? Like he's a detective, but he also understands the minds of his criminals, right? So
Yeah.
he's actually like psychologically adept, right? So the thing is, you can't do both at the same time, right? Like you can have a showy, flashy Bruce Wayne because we know that it's fake, and you can have an angry or motivated Batman at the same time because clearly Bruce Wayne is fake. But this Bruce Wayne that you're showing us, this depressive Bruce Wayne, that's not fake, right? That's not a mask. You're showing us a depressive Bruce Wayne that's in mourning. But if you're showing us a depressive Bruce Wayne that's in mourning, you can't show that to us at the same time that you're showing to us a fully realized control Batman or even an out of control angry Batman,
Or even
because
like, yeah.
you can't be both mental states. The reason why it works in the other way is because the Bruce Wayne playboy billionaire, that's not the actual Bruce Wayne. It's a mask. It's a dummy. So it works because it's fake. But you're showing us two real things. You're showing us a really depressed, grieving Bruce Wayne and a really angry and inexperienced Batman. But you're showing us two real things versus showing us one fake thing and one real thing. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I feel like the fact that he's being Batman is like a requirement of him because it's like it's a psychological coping mechanism. Like he has to do this because he has to do this. And you know, it's like you said, to go on your point, it's been, you know, like he hasn't gotten over, it's been 2 years since he's been Batman. He should be in a state now where he's kind of starting to get his footing and understanding that, you know, this is something that he has to be able to operate. He cannot be at the point now where he's been doing this for so long that he cannot be able to function, because how can you function when you're compromised mentally like that?
yeah, no, exactly. Like the whole parable of Batman is you make something great out of something painful, right? You take a painful bad experience and you turn it into something good and productive, right? That's Batman. Like he took a tragedy and he became Batman, right? So this Batman, it's like two different characters. Like you're showing us a Bruce Wayne and a Batman that are not linearly connected. You're showing us two things at the same time that are completely disconnected, but you want us to feel for both of those things. But we can't feel for both of those things at the same time. We could only feel for one or the other.
I think it comes down to Matt Reeves as a guy because, you know, I think what he was trying to do was bring us a different take on Bruce Wayne, which is fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that. But you have to take everything else that has come before into consideration before you do that, because the mythos of Batman is pretty well ingrained, and when you change something, you have to really understand and know what you're doing because it affects everything else. Like, it's sort of similar to the Watchmen situation where Zack Snyder changed the ending of Watchmen, and it's like, dude, if you change the ending of Watchmen, you have to make every single thing else in the film reworked because it doesn't become the same thing anymore. Not to say that, you know, Batman is it's on the same level as Watchmen, but what I'm trying to say is that, like, these things have been around for a while, man, and it works because it works. So you have to really be sort of on a very high level of creativity to bring out something that's different like this. Otherwise, you know, like, you know, we're analyzing this now, we're finding out like some of the stuff doesn't make sense. But yeah, I mean,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
let me ask you this, because he kind of has a glimpse of how it could work. I just don't think he's made the distinction yet. I
Could
think that
definitely,
depressive.
yes, I agree. He definitely could have done something here, but it just didn't come through.
Well, you know the scene with where you see Bruce Wayne with the glasses and Alfred's doing the crossword puzzle, and you see like the gothic Wayne inside the dinner table when
Yeah.
he comes, he kind of looks pale and he kind of looks hungover. So that okay, so it's not the playboy billionaire Bruce Wayne, right? It's not Christian Bale. It's not the esoteric, disconnected Keaton Bruce Wayne,
Yeah,
right?
this is something
But
completely different.
but it kind of felt like because in that scene, the board members from Wayne, what is it? Wayne Enterprises were supposed to be coming over, right? After they had that whole fight with "You're not my father" and "Why'd you tell him to come here?" and that
Yes.
whole thing, right? So,
Teen
which was
angst.
out of place for the whole movie because we never really saw anything about that again besides the "You lied to me, Alfred." Which, okay, if you want to do this teen angst thing, let's go for it. This is a guy that beats up criminals in the middle of the night and he's upset with Alfred for what, right? But you have that scene where in the trailer, I think they had a glimpse of him looking up from the paper and he had the glasses on that they cut from the movie, right? So you don't see that in the movie, but that moment of this Bruce Wayne, okay, like you want to do the like white pale skin Bruce, the mopey kind of like looks like he's drugged up Bruce, this like punk rock star like lifestyle where he's not a flashy billionaire, but he is like a punk rock star that's always like, how rock stars like always have the glasses and the hangovers and the drugs and the women and the party life, where they're always like this like shell of a person because they've done so much partying that they're like waking up from the worst hangover ever. Like, I got that impression from that scene and I was like, okay, this is not that Bruce Wayne, but this Bruce Wayne could work if we saw more of this. More of the sunglasses, more of the hungover look. You could do the sullen thing, but it doesn't come across emo. It comes across kind of like did too much partying and now you're stumbling across the room, right? It kind of comes across like that. And then in behind him, they had like the gothic like cathedral Wayne like dinner room, which was like, well, this is a kind of dynamic that works. So I thought that Bruce Wayne is something that could work if that's what he was doing that he did in that scene. But the Bruce Wayne in the interrogation with the Riddler, where he kind of like gets very shy, and the Bruce Wayne in the funeral, and the Bruce Wayne like when the third time that he knocks on the twin security door at the Iceberg Lounge and he's Bruce Wayne and he's like, I'm Bruce Wayne, but he's kind of still looking at the floor, like he's still very like emo awkward, right? That doesn't work. But if you took those three versions out, those three instances, and you did the instance where he's in the dining room table with Alfred with the glasses, okay, that works. Because for one, you don't even see his eyes unless he's Batman. Like if this is a Bruce Wayne that's always going around with sunglasses, similar to how Carmine Falcone was always going around with sunglasses, right? Like as a mob boss, it's like, okay, that works because during the day, he's wearing sunglasses. He looks like he's drugged up. You would think, oh, billionaire money, wasting his money on the needle and drugs and all this like superficial, like cliche perspectives you would have of like billionaires that are going on like punk rock lifestyle, right? Of deterioration, right? So it's like, okay, that's believable and it makes sense within a billionaire setting. And then Batman, when he's Batman, he's wearing a mask, but now you actually see his eyes. So you connect more to his Batman than you do to his Bruce Wayne because his Bruce Wayne's always wearing dark, large sunglasses. Right? That to me works, and that's all in here where you could go in that direction. But the whole Bruce looking down and being mopey emo and you're not my father and you lied, like that does not work. That does not work at all. Like it's not a good look for Bruce Wayne or Batman.
No, I agree 100%. Which is probably why we didn't see a whole bunch of that, because I feel like that aspect of his character wasn't really fleshed out very well. But yeah, what do you think about the other characters? Like, I think we should probably talk about the Riddler a bit, because I don't know, for me, I've never really been a Riddler guy, but I enjoy the aspect of the character, and I think it brought a lot to this movie because the way that they weaved him into this, that was actually quite interesting. So they did the thing where like this reminded me of Batman Forever, man. They did the thing with the postcards, and I don't know. I mean, was that? I know you're a comic book guy. Was that an aspect of the comics? Like, did he like leave postcards like that?
No, I mean, okay. So there's a couple different like ways you can do the Riddler, right? And primarily the thing that connects all the different ways that you would do the Riddler is the riddles, right?
Right.
But the thing about the riddles is, in this movie, the way they interpreted riddles was, here's a postcard. It was the Batman Forever thing, right? Here's a
Yeah,
postcard
it
that's
was
a
very
riddle.
Batman Forever. I was surprised by that.
Yeah,
Actually.
and it's like solve this riddle to kind of see where you should go next, right? It's almost like a video game. Like solve this riddle to see what room you go into or where you should head, north, south, or east or west, right? So it's like, okay, but if you look at the animated series, if you look at the comic books, the connecting thing is the riddles, not postcards that contain riddles. Like, so what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is they had a little bit of that in here where he's dealing with the guy with the bomb, and if you figure out the riddle, the bomb supposedly won't go off. He has 3 questions or whatever it is, right? But he he kind of targets it to um the guy, the I think it was the DA, the guy that's wearing the bomb. Like
Yeah.
the questions are towards the guy that's wearing the bomb, and Batman is giving him the answers,
That's
right?
I no, I just
Which
want to sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I had a problem with that because it's like he can clearly hear Batman giving him the answers. He's
he
right
clearly,
there.
and he's clearly enjoying it because he's bobbing his head up and down like, oh, yes, yes, yeah, next one more, second
But
question,
yeah.
right? So that goes to where I think the Riddler is most effective, which is, you remember the animated series when you see the Riddler and it's this maze with the Minotaur? That's the most effective that Riddler is against Batman, because what you're doing is, one, the riddles are targeted to Batman in the moment. It's not a postcard that he got that he can think about and then tells him where to go. I mean, you could do that for maybe one of the scenes, but you don't need to do that for like 5 scenes, right? That's like one riddle.
He left this guy like 5 or 6 of those things.
Yeah, no, but drama is conflicting. Drama is conflictive action that escalates in risk and intensity. So maybe the first act of the movie, he gets a postcard that has a riddle, right? In the middle of the movie, there's a Minotaur, and this is why the Minotaur maze is stronger, is because you have less time to answer the riddle. It's in the moment and there's present danger, right? It's testing Batman's mind to solve the riddle, but usually, like if that episode with the Minotaur in the animated series, as they're going through the maze, it's not just testing their mind, but they still have to be physical, they still have to be agile. Even if they solve the riddle, they still then need to execute physically to get past like the sharp spikes or the Minotaur, or dodge this or dodge that. So it's like there's a time crunch, there's physical danger, there's mental prowess because they have to solve a riddle in a short amount of time. Once they solve the riddle in a short amount of time, they then physically have to do whatever they need to do to, avoid the danger and hit the button or hit whatever they need to hit or head whichever direction they need to head to the next stage of things. So to me, that's when the Riddler is most effective, because it's like a riddle in the moment during a physical task that's tied together with the riddle. You know what I mean?
Sort
Instead
of
of just like, here's a postcard with a riddle. It's like, well,
kind
okay,
of
we saw that
it
in
sort of reminds
Zodiac.
me, yeah, it reminds me of Saw, and sort of how like he would always have this sort of a device that you have to figure out. There's always a way out, but you have to figure it out, sort of thing. But I I got a lot of sort of Joker vibes from it, man. Like, I thought the performance was actually pretty good. Um, it went a little bit off the rails at the end. A lot of people are complaining about that, and I agree with it. Um, the guy was basically your typical sort of like internet recluse for the
Yeah,
most part.
they did the Tom Hardy Bane thing, where he's good for the most part of the movie, and in the third act, Bane is just like a bodyguard to Leah, right?
They messed
Whereas with
him
this,
up, yeah. They messed him up at the
yeah,
end.
yeah, he's just like a social. He's like a YouTuber. It's like, do we
Listen,
really have to
man.
turn him into a YouTuber in the third act? Was
This
that necessary? Like,
this guy had 500 followers.
it's like, at one part I found it funny. I thought it was kind of funny because of like the unexpectedness of it, right? I was like, oh, and the way he opens the video, hey guys, like, wait a minute,
It
are
took me by
you are
surprise. I
you
was like,
this
what?
are you this dude that for the 90% of the movie was doing this heavy breathing and yelling and screaming and always rageful in how you talk, and towards the middle then you were doing the head bobbing and the laughing at the amusement of your riddles being solved, and then when you're caught in Arkham, you're doing the rageful thing again. But then you get to the very third act, so you're kind of going between like rageful like outburst, narcissism, and self-amusement at having power to riddle someone and play with them, and they're playing your game, and you're kind of like assimilating between those two things for like most of the movie. So it's like, okay, well, these are the two sides of the Riddler as you're playing him. But then we get to the third act, and he's like, hey guys. It's like, which Riddlers? Like, okay, you have
weird.
a third aspect of your personality now, right? Like,
it was so weird, man. And I think the Merc said it best in his like Batman breakdown. He said it basically, oh god, how did he put this? It basically, a guy like that, a guy that has that sort of mindset of being very calculated, he wouldn't be bursting out that way, because it takes away from how scary this guy actually is. Because remember how John Doe was portrayed in Seven?
Calm.
That was the calmest guy I've ever seen in my life, because this guy was already 10 steps ahead.
Yep, he was in control.
He was in complete control, and I felt like, yeah, like
and it was a plan. It was a plan that was unfolding to his end, right? Like, his plan successfully came to fruition how he saw it coming to fruition.
That's the difference here, because I don't understand, because at the end of the movie, it seemed as if he was expecting Batman to react a certain way when he was talking to him in that cell. And Batman is like, trying to like figure out what...
He was like, he was like a disappointed fan. Like,
yeah.
He idolized Batman, he was disappointed. He was like, this is not how it was supposed to go.
He
like,
acted like Batman was like gonna be on his level. Like, oh, this is gonna be my new business partner.
He acted exactly how Jim Carrey acted when he was disappointed that Bruce Wayne didn't buy into his business, as a, you know, fangirl idolizing Bruce Wayne type of thing. But he also acted the same way Joaquin Phoenix did as Joker when the talk show host wasn't what he imagined him to be like. Right? It was almost it was the same exact thing. So we've seen it in Batman Forever, and we've seen it in Joker with Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that, you know.
But it also brings up another point, which is, to me, all the villains reflect Batman. So Batman comes first, and the villains are a different mirror to Batman. So you can give any detective a postcard with a riddle on it. It says nothing about the character of Batman, right? So, like, to me, you know, Joker Chaos, Batman Control, they say a lot about each other. But, you know, one's calm, one's completely off the walls. But and one's order and one's chaos, however you want to phrase it. But then you get to the Riddler. You know, obviously Two-Face is the duality of Batman. One's Harvey Dent, one's Two-Face, one's Bruce Wayne, one's Batman. They both have the duality thing going on, right? So obviously Batman had a random crime that killed his parents. Two-Face flips a coin, which is random, and you know where justice is going to go, left or right. So it reflects each other. So then you get to Riddler. And to me, Riddler is almost, you know, he's clearly like the mental aspect of Batman, where Batman is good at solving psychological things, chemical things, detective things. And Riddler is also very intelligent. They're both narcissistic. But the difference is that Batman has physical prowess. And Riddler, out of all the villains, even Joker, has the least physical prowess, because Joker, if you're crazy enough, you're dangerous physically, because that guy will like break his own bones to like get you in danger, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
He's so crazy that Joker will do something with his craziness that makes him a little bit more physically dangerous than Riddler, right? Because Riddler's just narcissistic and very analytical and mental, and also physically not intimidating and not any kind of physical prowess. So I always look at Batman and Riddler as, because of the physical prowess of Batman, the only thing the Riddler can do to fight against Batman is throw as many riddles and mazes and contraptions and physical feats in between him and Batman. So while he's challenging the mental side of Batman, and I would argue the Riddler should be better mentally than Batman, it's just that if you look at it as like, Batman is 50% mental capacity and 50% physical capacity, and he excels at both, and Riddler is 100% mental capacity and completely like dominates everybody mentally. but physical capacity, he's at a 0, right? I still look at it that through that kind of push and tug, Batman still comes up on top because it's 50-50, and he uses those two strengths to overcome the Riddler, the riddle combined with his physical prowess to get through whatever the obstacle in between them is, right? So it's almost like that's how I see the Riddler. Like he's throwing riddles in physical manifestations at the Batman to keep him away physically.
He's making up for his strength.
Right, and test him mentally, right? So yeah, so the whole thing where you're just like a fan of Batman and you're disappointed, like that's not Riddler. The Riddler shouldn't be a fan of Batman because he's smarter than Batman. He should be for the most part. Maybe Batman gets the one riddle that he needs to get to like really put the Riddler away, but the Riddler should be smarter than everybody else except Joker just because he's crazy, right? Like except Joker just because he's not in the plane of like regular thinking. So it's like like
you
the
know
Riddler
what I
should
thought?
be.
You know what I thought was gonna happen? I fully expected this from the trailer. I really did think that he was gonna get captured because he wanted to get captured, and they would pull that whole like situation with like in 7 where like, well, spoilers for 7, sorry, but pretty much yeah, he intends, because a guy like that you would think would be like 10 steps ahead. So when he gets captured, I was expecting like there to be some kind of reveal, like, oh yeah, well, I mean, there kind of was with the bombs.
You know what the funniest line delivery is? That was hilarious. Was like, you know when he realizes that Batman didn't realize the whole plan,
Yeah.
right? And he tells him, "I thought you were smarter than this," and he's upset.
Yeah.
Right? He's like, "This is not how it's supposed to go. You mean you didn't figure it out?" Right? That whole thing. But it's like, well, wait a minute. You didn't figure out that this is how Batman would be when you're face to face with him either. Like you're surprised that he's not the idol you thought he would be. So it's
Right.
like, so then it really takes you out of the moment because you're like, wait a minute, you're saying he's not smart enough for figuring out your whole plan, but you're not smart enough to realize that your idealistic fan view of Batman is not who he is in this moment, which you're getting upset. But if you had this plan that's coming up anyway, why are you getting upset? Because you already have this like last part of your plan that now that you're upset, you're telling Batman, oh, I thought you figured it out. So did you always have that last part of the plan and always thought he would figure it out, or did
It
you
seems a bit sloppy.
and now are you now upset that he didn't figure it out? But even though you're upset he didn't figure it out, you have another part of your plan as like coming up, but at the same time you didn't expect in this face-to-face that Batman wouldn't have it figured. Like, you know what I mean? It almost sets up this hilarious line that makes no sense because it's like it gets you into like a logical conundrum, which does not make sense from either character, from how the Riddler sees it to how he had this last part of this plan set up anyway, and in the way that Batman figures it out is he goes to the Riddler's place. And the guy's like, oh, that's a tool that woodcrafters and painters use, and you know, it's used to put like carpeting. And Batman's like, wait a minute, we're standing on carpeting right now. Let's lift this carpet up. And they lift the carpet. It's like, and the Riddler just had this huge diagram underneath this carpet. That's his whole plan. And it's like, so you drew this on the floor and then you covered it up with carpeting because you didn't want anybody to find it, but you couldn't have this in your mind? Like you couldn't have this plan of like turn off all the water faucets and like and, you know, some people will say the Riddler sets riddles because he wants to get caught, right? But when he got caught, it wasn't because Batman chased him down or figured anything out. He got caught because some lady was like, oh yeah, I saw him and he was in the diner. And they're like, oh look, he's in the diner, and then they go catch him, right? Not Batman doesn't catch him. They all catch him just because he's there.
He gets
right?
there late. He's like running behind.
No, I think they were trying to go with the dynamic that he wanted to be caught, so he's waiting in the diner because he wants to come face to face with Batman. But then when he comes face to face with Batman and he's disappointed, you would think that was the end of his plan, right? But he's let down and he's like, oh, you didn't figure it out? There's this other part that's coming up for the third act right in time because we need a third act. You know, it's like, you know what I mean? It was a little weird.
Yeah, man. There's a lot of moments like that in this. Like to me, I think this movie, honestly, like it was a bit too long. They could have cut out an entire like subplot in this thing. Um, yeah. So I mean, what do you think of Catwoman?
I still prefer Michelle Pfeiffer.
I think
I don't look at this as Catwoman. I look at this as Selena Kyle, right? Selena Kyle, who's a cat burglar, but she's not Catwoman yet. I look at Oz as Oz, who's not yet the Penguin. He doesn't really have an umbrella. He doesn't have anything of his own. He's just working for Falcone, and most people call him Oz, right? So you look at Batman. He's not really Batman. He has the suit, but that's about it. Um, so everybody to me is like Bruce Wayne in the Batsuit, but he's not Batman. Selena Kyle doing burglary, but she's not Catwoman. Oz having the Iceberg Lounge, but he's not really a villain of his own. He just works for Falcone, so he's not really yet the Penguin.
there's a lot in this that feels like that. It feels like
that's a lot.
They're banking a lot. They're banking a lot on the second movie, man. And
yeah.
to me,
yeah. And having said that, I liked her. I like what she did. I liked her in the first half better than this. Like, you know, the scene where he's seeing her get dressed, and he sees that she's wearing an outfit and that she goes out the window, and he's like, "Well, hold up, wait a minute, what's this?" Like he just thought she was a lead to solve like something related to the other girl, right? And he's seeing them together in the apartment, and then he's seeing her get dressed, which is kind of like a very Batman thing to be like following up and seeing what's going on, and she doesn't know that he's seeing what's going on, right? But he's kind of, it's almost like revealing to him that she's got this like other life, or this nightly life that's similar to his. So he's like, he kind of gets interested because he's like, what is this? And then he tracks her down and he's like, oh, you're pretty good at that. And then they get into a little altercation, right? Which is from the Long Halloween, when exactly like frame by frame when she's picking the safe, and they get into that. The Long Halloween has like a double panel wide shot where she's kicking him and he's like kind of guarding with his arm. And that's kind of when
that
they
scene
go.
was really good, by the way. I think I enjoyed that scene.
No, it was a very good scene between Catwoman and Batman, how it should play out, right, from like a physical standpoint and an interaction standpoint. But this is like taking, like, you know, the approach that you see in the television shows, like Gotham, like he's Batman, but he's a young Bruce Wayne. Like the Joker's in the TV series Gotham, but this is Gotham when Bruce Wayne is like 11 years old or like 16 years old. So he's not really Batman. It's a show Gotham, but he's a little kid. But all the villains are in here. But it's kind of like before he's Batman. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I don't know if you've seen Gotham, or I've seen parts of it, but it's like that Gotham approach where it's like, well, let's give you the character before the character. And I'm not really into that. Like, all the Batman films, I want to see Catwoman, I want to see Catwoman. I want to see Batman, I want to see Batman. I want to see Penguin, I want to see Penguin.
No,
I don't want to
man.
see the story before the story when the character was not the character, because it's like, well, then why am I watching like a prequel? You know,
it's like listen, they had a. This is not a short movie, man. They could have worked all that stuff in there, and probably still had time left over. But I mean, comparatively, I think, you know, I liked her better than Anne Hathaway.
Oh no, for sure, like for sure. Anne Hathaway, I don't even remember that character. Like,
it's, I mean, like the costume looked good. Like she looked good in the costume. I just feel like it was kind of Michelle Pfeiffer, man. She locked that. She has locked in Catwoman, man. I don't think anyone can really top that at this point. I mean,
well, she got more of the unhinged, you know, whereas this one, she like Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman, it seemed like anybody could be Catwoman. Like she didn't, her character was not so different that, how do I phrase it? Like it's kind of the same as Oz. Like Oz is not so different that he's not just another guy that's in the mafia that's working for some other guy and he wants to be the big boss, right? He was not that differentiated. Whereas in Batman Returns, the Penguin is really differentiated. In Batman Returns, Catwoman Selena Kyle is really differentiated, and so is Bruce Wayne Batman. They're all really differentiated from any other person in that world that could not be them. Right? Like no person in the Batman Returns world could be Selena Kyle Catwoman except her. Nobody could be Penguin except him. Nobody could be Bruce Wayne Batman except him. That's the sense you get when you watch the film. You get the sense that they're outsiders that are very specific characters. Whereas with this, I get the sense anybody could really be Oz. You know, maybe they act the same way, but they're not short and limping and looking like a penguin. Maybe they're tall and lanky and they're the Joker before he was the Joker, right? What's the difference? And then you look at Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne Batman, it kind of feels like, well, that little boy could be Bruce Wayne Batman. He's kind of like grieving and mopey like this Pattinson is grievy and mopey. There's not a huge difference between them, and I know it's supposed to remind him of himself, but my point is that in this world, how these characters are presented, it really feels anybody in this world could be any one of these characters. You know what I mean? Whereas in Returns, it really felt that they were singular. Like they were so specific that not anybody in this world can be this character. Like it was like an individual thing.
Yeah, I think it's a characterization thing, because you really have to sort of think about what approach you're gonna take. And with this, Matt Reeves kind of just did the Christopher Nolan thing. Well, she's just a cat burglar, and the difference is, I mean, I think I really enjoyed Michelle Pfeiffer's performance, because the thing is, he made it almost like a supernatural thing.
Yeah.
Like the way that she basically died to become Catwoman.
You know the cool thing that he did too is that he I always like to say you can do fantasy, but do it in a logical way where you follow your own rules, right? In a fantasy setting, versus fantasy films that don't make any sense, and we look at them and we go, this is absurd because you're breaking your own rules, right? Like it's the same thing with like Star Wars. Like it's a fantasy, but you have certain rules and religion and lightsabers and Sith and Jedi, and even though it's a fantasy, you can't break certain rules that you set up. Otherwise, your fantasy unravels and it becomes absurd. You can't buy into it, right? Same thing with Blade Runner, Terminator, RoboCop. Like the rules can be whatever you want them to be, but once you set the rules, those are the rules. Like you can't just like upend your fantasy rules and now your whole narrative premise is falling apart. So it's like with the Catwoman thing in Returns, he straddles the line of, does she have 9 lives? Does she not? But the cool thing that he does, that he puts as a rule that kind of solidifies like the logic of it, is that he kind of has the cat, like she's thrown out of the window, her skin goes completely like blue and white, right? So you're like, wow, this looks like a dead body, right? And he has the cats biting her and she comes back to life. And then she does go through other deaths in the film where they're like death moments. Like they're moments that it really did look like she died again, right? But the way that he grounds it is that he only gives her 9 lives, which is playing off the idea of the cat having 9 lives and the cat always landing on her feet, right? And then he kind of increases the risk. So as you go from 9 to 2 to 1, he really does make it feel like, okay, this is her last life. And every time she dies, he put it in the narrative of her character that she becomes a little bit more psychologically unhinged.
Yes.
So it's fantastical, but you know the logic. You're like, okay, she has 9 lives, she can die 9 times. Fantastical, but there's a reasoning to it, because every time she dies and comes back a little bit more psychologically unhinged. And the last moment that she dies is the moment where she kisses whoever it is, Max Schreck, with the electricity, and she uses her last life apparently to essentially like give it up the way that she wants to give it up, to do something good, right? Versus the other 8 times that she died. But when she comes back at the end, it's almost like, oh look, she's back, she just doesn't have 9 lives anymore. Now she's literally her last life, right? So it's like he set it up in a way that it's fantastical, but he grounded it with logic, and that's what you're supposed to do with fantasy. You get a fantastic premise and an idea and a concept, but then you say, okay, what are the rules of this concept? Like the idea of a lightsaber is an absurd, fantastical concept. A sword made out of light, right? A samurai sword that's like a laser. Okay, but what are the rules? Who can use it? Who can't use it? How do you use it? How can't you use it? When do you use it? Like, how does it function in the world, right? So it's almost like that's what Burton did with Catwoman, and it worked really well. Like it really, because it was this ambiguous thing, but if you wanted to follow it, you can follow it, but it was still kind of like winking of is it or isn't it, or is this what's happening or is this not what's happening, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's something that's been kind of lacking in movies lately. Sort of the paying attention to the details and understanding, like, when you're dealing with certain things, you have to have a rule set in mind. And I think watching this movie, there clearly was some sort of thread that he was going for, but some of the rules just didn't really line up properly. But, you know, as we kind of wind down here, I want to talk about some standout moments because, you know, there's a couple moments in this movie that I think he really sort of regulated, man. And, you know, I gotta give Matt Reeves credit for that because even though, you know, it wasn't a perfect film, I did enjoy certain parts of this. Can we talk about the Batmobile?
Yeah, yeah, we can.
That Batmobile scene was pretty outrageous, Batval. Like, I don't know if you're like a car guy, but, you know, I'm kind of a car guy, but listening to the sound of that engine in a theater was crazy. And the way that he set that up with the revving, and then you see the lights, and then you see the car. Like, listen, I was a hater of that Batmobile when I first saw it. I'm like, what is this? But I gotta say, man, like, after seeing it in action, man, it was a pretty crazy scene. My only real gripe is that I kind of wish that it had some sort of ability to it, because you know how every Batmobile in every Batman movie has some sort of like gimmick to it, where it can. I was expecting something, because if you look at the design of that thing, it has like some sort of weird sort of look to it on the hood. Like I was expecting something to come out of the hood, or some sort of like mechanism, some kind of gadgetry to happen, and it didn't really happen, and I was kind of disappointed by that. But that entire sequence when he was chasing the Penguin was pretty crazy, man.
Well, I think I agree in some parts, I disagree in other parts. So like the initial reveal of the car itself, I loved that moment, right? The blue and the red, the screeching of the engine, the sound, the revving, the vibration, Penguin staring down the vehicle, and it's kind of like this game of chicken, of because he knows it kind of like bluffs forward and then Penguin starts running, right? So it's like that initial reveal I think worked really, really well, and I think it's as good of a Batmobile reveal as the original Batmobile reveal in Batman '89. Just a different style that was more auditory based versus like visual based, of like, look at this big long Batmobile car and it's like, whoa, what's this thing, right? And then you see as an audience Vicky Vale's reaction to that and you relate to her. That's your way in to that moment, right? Whereas this, your way into the moment is Penguin being afraid, like, what the hell is that thing, right? But then once the car and the chase started, I didn't think the chase scene itself was as good as people were making out to be. And I think you have to really understand that, you have to go to what Reeves was even himself trying to do. You know, he mentions that with the chase scene, he was trying to do it similar to like French Connection, to these films that have these like great chase scenes, like some of the movies with I don't know, the guy that was in Bullet, I forget his name, but he had like the blonde hair and he did a lot of chase scenes in his movies. But
Right.
and it was like the 60s, 70s or something like that. But mainly Reeves mentioned the French Connection and the car chase in the French Connection with that guy that was playing Doyle, the detective, what's his name? The guy that was in The Conversation. I forget his name, the actor's name. But anyway, so Reeves was trying to do that. But the thing about a good chase scene, whether it's on foot or whether it's like a car chase scene, is it has different beats and moments that are very like specific beats and moments. Whereas this, they had a lot of cool a lot of cool angles with where they put the cameras, you know, a lot of cool sequences, but it wasn't anything specifically laid out in terms of beats of a narrative car chase, moment to moment, like suspense or like, you know, action reaction moments.
Yes, yeah. I mean, well,
In
they
terms of the two
ruined one
characters,
of them. They ruined one of them from showing it in the trailer, which I think was a mistake.
right? And you know, there's the big moment where it goes through the fire at the end.
Yes,
And
yeah, exactly.
which leads to the hilarious scene, which I don't think we should see in any Batman film, right? Because it puts him in like, it makes it look, it's trying to look intimidating, but it looks weak. And the scene is, you have, like, obviously when the car's upside down and Oz is in the car and Batman's approaching them with the fire in the back, and you see the silhouette of the car and the silhouette of Batman, and you see the boots. Okay, that works, right? But the moment that Batman gets on a knee and looks down into the window of the car, he looks so ridiculously unintimidating that I've come to the conclusion you should never have a scene in a Batman movie where you see Batman get down on a knee and look into a car like a dopey guy in a batsuit, because it was supposed to be intimidating and they were blaring the music, but the visual of him getting down on a knee and looking down into Oz in the car upside down was not intimidating at all, right? Either you have him coming from the silhouette and Oz sees him and that's scary enough, right? Or Oz sees the fire in the car and he doesn't see Batman, and Batman's on top of the car and he reaches down and grabs him and pulls him out of the car, right? You do something kind of like essentially what he did in Batman Begins when he landed on the car and then he pulls Carmen Falcone out of the car, right? Like, you do something like that, but you don't have Batman get on a knee and look into the car with Oz, so his face is literally right there, and if Oz just wants to just like reach out and deck him in the face, he could totally just deck him in the face, because he's literally just looking into this car like what? Like, Batman, what are you doing right now? Like, you're kneeling, he's clearly incapacitated, he's upside down, right? Like, why are you putting yourself in a compromising position of getting down in your knees with the rain,
man, he did that
to look into the car, like, from a very what if the Penguin just pulls out his gun and just shoots you blank face in the face? Like,
Batman made so many mistakes in this. I mean, I understand that this is his year 2, but there's certain fundamental things that you just should know.
It's narrative, it's motivation. Like, the action of kneeling down to look at Oz in the car. What are you do? What is the motivate? Like, as he was walking, he sees Oz in the car, right? Like, he knows he's upside down. He sees him, right? So you figure, what do you want to do? You want to get him out of the car so you guys can question him? Like, okay, show us you walking up to the car and get him out of the car. But what are you trying to do, like, when you're kneeling down and getting that close to him? Are you trying to see that it's him? Because you know it's him. Are you trying to whisper to him something that he can't hear you say from far away? Like, are you trying to communicate something through a whisper? Like, why do you need to get your
unnecessary.
head?
It was unnecessary.
Yeah, and it looked really dopey.
He's already established that, yes, I'm clearly a better driver than you. You know, so it's almost like an ego thing. You know, but I mean, look, man. There's some stuff in this movie where I feel like Batman was a little bit disrespected in parts of this movie, man. But, you know, I don't want to be too negative on this because we're kind of winding down here, and I just want to go over a couple more things before we kind of get out of here. Let's see, what else is there? Yeah, so I think we should probably... Riddler. Yeah, we did covered Riddler, covered Catwoman.
Well, the Riddler and Joker Arkham
yeah.
scene.
Let's talk about the ending.
Oh, and the third act of the movie. Yeah, that too.
Yeah, so I don't like the idea of having Joker in this movie at all. That's just me. I feel like if you're gonna do it, it's almost like a foregone conclusion that you have to have, like, either don't show the guy and leave it ambiguous, or it has to be Joaquin. It's like ABC 1, 2, 3 at this point.
Wait, do you know who the actor was that they got for that?
No, I don't. I mean, I have no idea who the guy is, but
Have you seen Disney's Eternals?
Oh no, I stayed away from that. I stayed away from that.
But have you seen the trailer for Eternals?
Yeah, I've seen the trailer. Yeah.
So you know when it shows all the Eternals in the film, and you see the guy with the mushroom haircut?
Oh God.
He's like a young actor. He's like a pretty young guy.
He's
kind of wearing like like a dark robe thing, and he kind of comes out. He's smirking. He kind of has his hands like behind him, and he has like sort of a mushroomy haircut.
That's the guy?
Yep, that's the guy. So he's a young actor. He's a young Joker. He's as young as Pattinson's Batman or Paul Dano's Riddler. He's a young Joker. Like, he's not an old actor.
But I mean, that's interesting, but my question is, like, do you feel like that was the right choice to like move the Joker for the next film? Because I feel like that's almost like
I'm mixed about it. I'm mixed about it, and here's why. You don't really see too much of Arkham in Batman '89 and Batman Returns, right? You don't really see. I mean, you see a little bit of it in Batman Forever, but not so much till the end, right? Batman and Robin, we could skip over. I don't know if you need an Arkham in that, but Batman Begins, you have the Narrows, and you're kind of getting like a more of an Arkham type of thing. You see a little bit of it at the end. The animated series is probably the closest place outside of the comic books where you actually see Arkham Asylum. And this movie, mentioning the Wayne's histories with the Arkham's histories, is probably the closest thing outside the comics that even makes a reference to the Wayne's, origin point and Arkham's origin point, and putting it into the narrative that there is an Arkham Asylum, right? So the fact that in the movie you see an Arkham Asylum, and you have, because in Batman Forever you see Arkham Asylum and it's just the Riddler that's in there and he's lost his mind, right? And it's like an absurd moment. In this movie, you have Arkham Asylum, but you have Batman in Arkham Asylum, which we rarely see in films, when he talks to the Riddler behind the glass, right? And you had Batman talking to Joker behind Joker in the table in the Dark Knight, but I don't believe that was Arkham. I think that was just the police station or whatever, wherever they were holding him, right? So it's like, okay, I like the fact that we do have Arkham. I like the fact that we are getting Batman and Riddler in Arkham in a traditional like face-to-face type of set, and it really, I think that scene worked outside of the emo dopey Bruce Wayne looking at the camera and as Batman kind of just still looking at the ground. But then you get Riddler and Joker in Arkham at the end of the film. And I like this because we've never seen more than one Batman rogue in Arkham with another Batman rogue in Arkham, to hint at the idea that in Gotham City there's a place called Arkham Asylum, and this is where Batman ends up putting all of his villains, and all of his villains end up escaping, and he keeps putting them one by one back into this asylum. Right? So it's almost like the home of Batman's rogues gallery, right? It's their temporary in and out home, right? Like they're
pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. Like they come and go, but essentially they all end up back there, right? So it's like, that's a huge character. That's a huge character, and that was a huge character in Joker, the film as well. So it's like, I like that aspect. The aspect of introducing Joker this early is a little bit weird, because Matt Reeves confirmed that it is the Joker, and at the same time, he also confirmed that, because you could go like, oh, is this a guy that's in Arkham that Batman's never even met, right? But that's not true, because Matt Reeves says that there was a scene in the movie earlier where Batman goes to the Joker to try and figure out what's going on with the Riddler, but he cut that scene out because when they were testing the movie, when they were testing the movie, they didn't think it played as well, so they thought it wasn't necessary, so they took the scene out. Instead, you get the scene with Batman and the Riddler in Arkham, and then you still get Joker at the end. So he has that leftover part at the end, whereas the Joker originally, he had him in two scenes. One scene with Batman, and then one scene at the end with the Riddler, right? So it's like, maybe when they release a behind the scenes, they'll release that scene, and we could see if it works or not, because part of me wants to feel like maybe it works better if they kept the scene in, but I would have to see that scene, because here's the other question. So Matt Reeves is saying that this Batman has met this Joker who's now in Arkham Asylum talking to the Riddler, because he had a scene earlier in the movie where Batman goes to the Joker to try and get a lead, or ideas about how to handle the Riddler, essentially imitating Silence of the Lambs. Clarice goes to Hannibal Lecter, who's in the prison to get an idea about the serial killer that's outside of the prison. So he was going to do that with the Joker. I mean, because it's clearly following that type of scenario, right? You
Yeah.
go to one criminal to find out how another criminal is working. One criminal's captured, the other criminal's on the loose, right? So it's that Silence of the Lambs idea. But the thing is, the Batman you're giving us is not even Batman yet. He's Bruce Wayne in a suit, and he's making a lot of mistakes, and he's still grieving the death of his parents. How is this so this Batman that you're showing us, how is this Batman going to have a scene with this Joker? Because one, he would eat him alive, unless this Joker is not a Joker, is like a guy that's not yet the Joker, which makes no sense. Because then, why is he in Arkham Asylum? Are you telling me he's like a criminal that got caught and he's insane, but he hasn't reached the Joker insanity yet?
You know what I just realized?
That doesn't make sense. Like, he's either insanely the Joker, or he's not. But when he's in the asylum, he's talking like the Joker, right? He's mentioning clowns, he's laughing.
Those guys that he fought at the beginning kind of look like Joker goons, man. Like with the makeup.
They did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Which brings the question, like, in your Gotham, is the Riddler just a guy that has a bunch of random followers through social media, and is then the Joker just a guy that also has a bunch of random young followers? Because they both have like a bunch of random young followers that are like doing thug criminal things, right?
You're right,
like
man. Because they
clearly
show.
Yeah.
They clearly show that this is a world where like the internet exists, and there's people that get followings. So why not? I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to think about. Like, so you tell me that we're in a world where the Joker is known and he's locked up, and you got another guy running. Like, this is crazy. So we're living in a world where like you can actually follow psychopaths basically on social media. That's kind of a crazy concept.
It's a crazy concept, but it also, you can't do that for all the villains. First of all, like, is that like, what kind of interpretation is that?
That
and
would
it's
be
secondly,
ridiculous.
and it's like, secondly, like, you can't have the proper Joker with this Batman, because he would eat him alive. So then the next thing is,
he's not ready. He's nowhere near ready for that.
right. So then you figure they're gonna say the year 2 approach. This is a Batman before he's Batman, so it's Bruce Wayne in a suit, and this is a Joker before he's Joker, so it's a guy in Arkham, but he's not Joker. So it's like, okay, wait, but I see he has the smile through the silhouette. I see he has the hair. I see he's talking about clowns. I see he's laughing, and I see he's talking to Riddler about being his friend, right? So he's acting quite a lot like the Joker, right? So it's like,
yeah, there's like no doubt that's Joker.
And if he wasn't the Joker, why do I want to see a scene with a young Bruce Wayne in a batsuit that's not Batman talking to a young Joker that's got the smile but maybe not the face paint? So he's like semi-Joker, like he's on his way to becoming the Joker, but he's not the Joker. But the best thing about the Joker is he just is. Like, you know, you give a bunch of different origin points for the Joker, and he's always been the Joker, which makes him the scary thing, is that you know Batman's origin, but you can't really place Joker's origin. Or if you take the Killing Joke approach, he was a failed stand-up comedian that had a bad day and had a psychological break and then became the Joker. But he didn't have a slow progression. Or you take the Jack Nicholson, he fell in a vat of chemicals and he became the Joker. But in all those interpretations, he doesn't have a slow progression from normalcy to becoming the Joker. It's predicated on the fact that any one bad day to any person or any one of us can make you me. And you can be as unhinged and insane as me. And then he tries to demonstrate this with Gordon, right? He gives Gordon one of the worst days with his daughter and with other things to try and get Gordon to have a psychological break like he did and make him insane, right? To show like any random person with one really, really bad day can become the Joker, right? Or completely lose their mind. Like, that's, from what I remember from that interpretation, that was the point, right? So, and then when they ask Reeves about it, there's a lot that he's like left and right about. Like the way that he, like, the character is the character, but they're not yet the character. They're on their way to becoming the character. This back and forth is like something he does with his interview too, because they asked him like, he talked about wanting to do Mr. Freeze for the next film, right? And then they said, oh, can you confirm the character at the end, was that the Joker? And he goes, yeah, that was the Joker. And we had a scene earlier in the film where Batman goes to the Joker. Maybe we'll show it in the behind the scenes, maybe we won't, etc. But we took it out and we have the end scene with the Joker. I confirmed that's the Joker. But then he also said, but I don't know if I'm going to use him or I'm not going to use him. So it's like, wait a minute, Matt Reeves. So why do you have the Joker at the end of your film? Is it because Batman Begins had the Joker at the end of their film?
Jeez,
like, is that
man.
the only reason? Like, or are you introducing? Because he kind of hinted at the idea that he's not sure yet. He hinted at the idea of like, yeah, look, like that is the Joker at the end of the movie. I confirm it. You might see him again in future movies, but you also might not see him, and it might have just been a one-off. So it's like, okay, wait a minute. So you're clearly stating this is your perspective. So you're essentially saying I could take it or leave it with the Joker, but you gave us a glimpse of the Joker either as like a little tease of a one-off, which brings up questions of like, why is the Joker this early in Batman's career when Batman's not even Batman and they didn't even have an interaction together, right? And that scene also turns the Riddler into like a laughing lunatic like the Joker, right? Like instead of having the interaction where one guy's laughing and the other guy's asking him riddles about why he's laughing, you have both of them cackling and laughing after the Riddler is essentially crying and moping, right? To say you have a friend in me, and then they're both like dancing and jumping up and down in the cell, like ha ha ha, right?
It's like they were the same guy.
It was like the same guy. So it's like, wait a minute. So Reeves, like, and the idea that you may use him, you may not use him, you put him in the movie, but you confirm it's him. This character might be Riddler, but it's before he's Riddler. This is Batman, but before he's trying not to tie himself in. He's trying to keep things so open. So whenever he gets attacked about any kind of choice he does later on in the second film or third film, he could just wing it as he goes along. He's trying to like not box himself in, which is like, okay, that could be good to a degree. You don't want to box yourself in. You don't want to say you're going to do something and then not do it. But at the same time, you're also showing that you don't have a narrative plan. You don't have a 3-act structure. You don't have a first, second, and third film planned. You did the first film. You put in a couple open... What was the biggest problem with Force Awakens? The biggest problem with Star Wars Force Awakens was that it planted a lot of open-ended seeds that later on didn't have a plan, and later on those open-ended scenes ended up going places that completely subverted and destroyed the franchise. Whether it was the same director for the second and third movies, because here's like what happened with Star Wars Force Awakens. There was open-ended seeds. The next director was a different director, and he took those open-ended seeds that were planted and he went wherever he wanted, right? So whether the next movie is Reeves or some other director by happenstance, right? You never know what could happen. And I think it's going to be Reeves because I don't think anybody else is going to come in. Like I don't see something happening. Like I don't see something happening where a different director comes in because he leaves. I think he'll make he made 2 Planet of the Apes films. I think he'll make 2 or 3 Batman films.
He's gonna get he's gonna get a trilogy out of this easily. But
I don't think a lot has changed. But you know what else he said too, which is crazy. Now picture this: they're doing an HBO Max Penguin series, right? So you can't do a Penguin series and not have different characters. Maybe Batman comes in and out of some episodes. Maybe it's just the Penguin with the cops and the mafia. But you're gonna have like cameos because it's a TV series on HBO Max. Like you can't have a full season of a narrative with just the Penguin. You're gonna have other characters from the Batman comic books, right? You're gonna have other IP make introductions into that story, right? And then they were gonna have a GCPD drama series that was going to focus just on the police force. So there was going to be the police force series and there was going to be the Penguin series. But now Reeves has flipped and he said, well, you know what? I was thinking about that and we're not going to do a GCPD police series. We're going to change it so it's an Arkham Asylum series. So it's like, wait a minute. If you're doing an Arkham Asylum series, what Arkham Asylum means is a story about Arkham, the nature and origin of Arkham. You already showed us Joker and Riddler at the end of your movie in Arkham. So then if you're giving us an HBO Max Arkham series, we know they're already there, right? Because you just showed us that. or maybe you're showing us the building of Arkham, but that's only going to be like 1 or 2 episodes before you have to get into the meat of what an Arkham's TV series has to be, which means you're going to give us villains in an HBO Max Arkham series before you give us your film version of those villains. You know what I mean? So it's almost like you made a movie and now you're doing 2 spin-off TV series to continue from that movie before we get to your second movie. So you're going to introduce characters from Batman lore to us in a television format and then go back to the film format and then potentially go back to the TV format and then go back to the film format. But
listen, man, everyone wants to create the next Marvel multiverse, man.
Yeah.
I think
that's completely what they're doing. They want to
problem
capitalize
is that,
on.
like, dude, like, I'm one of those guys who just feels like you should just make something and let the people decide if you should make another one. This whole thing, Matt Reeves has been talking about yeah, go ahead.
But it's crazy because this has never been done, right? Like this, it was always you do a trilogy, you do 3 connected movies that are largely a beginning, middle, and end, right?
Yeah.
This format where you connect films with television, because we now have streaming and companies want to take advantage of streaming and they also want to take advantage of films, right? This interplay between film and TV, you're gonna lose. Like, if you're gonna do the interplay between film and TV, it's a very delicate trajectory because you could either do it well, or you could lose a lot of what makes the film the film. Like if you don't do it well, this could have been your best Batman movie, and Batman 2 and 3 is gonna be more like horrendously mixed with television spin-offs that it's not quite a film, but it's just a longer 2.5 hour branch off the HBO Max series that you just saw on TV. Does that make sense? Like you almost muddle the water between TV and film. Now you have great TV shows like Breaking Bad. You have great TV shows where they brought filmmaking to a television series. But I find it funny that the guy who wrote Boardwalk Empire was the guy that was going to write the Batman GCPD spinoff, but he left the project for creative differences, and now that he's left, after Batman comes out, Reeves is saying, oh, we're not doing a GCPD anymore. That series is now going to be called Arkham. Is it called Arkham because the guy that was going to write it as GCPD, who wrote Boardwalk Empire, left the project, and he was like the better writer that was on the project, and he left for creative differences, and now you're going towards the Arkham route? It seems weird to me. Like you want to make a Batman 2 and introduce Freeze and introduce characters, great. But if in between Batman 1 and Batman 2 you're making a TV show and we see like 5 Batman villains in Arkham without Batman, or maybe Batman's there for an episode or 2 because Pattinson's probably not always going to be available for a TV show, right?
Val, I just have one question. Can I have a finished product?
Yeah, no, they're doing it off the cuff.
Can someone just make a complete film and just have it end? And then, like, maybe 3-4 years later they decide to come back and make a second one? Is that too much to ask for? I mean, this is such a crazy thing. Like, who has time for this, man? I just feel like we've gotten to a point, where there's so much going on with these comic book films. There's TV shows and movies, and you gotta watch this episode to figure out what's happening here and there and everywhere. And the Merc is talking about this all the time, and it's so true. It's like, I don't have time. I just make a movie, complete movie. I watch the movie, sure. But to sit there and track and watch everything, it's too much. But
the quality is going to go up and down too, because the budget of a couple $100 million movie is not the same budget for a 45 to an hour episode of TV.
Yes,
maybe
man.
Whatever length the episode of TV is, the budget, the production value is going to be a little bit different, and the script is going to be different in a 2.5-3 hour movie versus a TV series that's episodic. So they're also going to end up blending. I mean, hey, like the director of a TV series, like they, even if Matt Reeves directs the first episode or the second episode, or he's the showrunner, usually it's rare for whoever's the showrunner or whoever's the pilot director, and if usually it's a bigger director, right? But usually it's rare that they direct all 24 or 10 or 15 episodes. Usually there's different directors that come in for different episodes. So
Yeah.
then you also have a little bit different, like, you have something that's consistent through all of them, but then you also have something a little bit different from episode to episode. So it's kind of, look, the Batman, the animated series was episodic, and that worked because the people that were writing it did a great job, and the people that were directing the episodes did a great job, and the structure of each episode was great. And even though it was episodic, each episode was like its own little movie, right? It brought film to TV, or to animation. That's the same way, because it came out after Batman '89 and Returns, and that greatly influenced it. But the same thing that Batman the Animated Series did, bringing film to TV, is what Breaking Bad did. It's what Boardwalk Empire did. It's what all those series did. But if Matt Reeves can do that, he either does it badly or he does it well. But then because he's also doing the movies, then he has to go back from TV to the film. And that's something we've never seen. So it's like, let's see if you could do that well. I know Marvel's trying to do that, but have they been doing it well? Like, with the whole Wanda series and with all these movies, and then the Eternals came out. Like, have they done it well?
From what I've been hearing, it seems like it's hit or miss. Like, the narrative is carrying through for all these shows, but the quality of the show seems to be different from show to show. But yeah, man, I think just to wrap this up, mixed, my feelings on this film. It had a lot of potential to be a very good movie, but I'm gonna go ahead and say, I'll probably give this like a 6 out of 10, above average. What about you?
I give it a 7 out of 10. When I rank the films, in terms of Batman, I think Keaton is number 1. I think Pattinson is number 2. I think Val Kilmer is number 3, and those are all the introverted Batmen. And then I'm gonna place Bale's Batman at dead last behind Clooney. As strange as that may sound, because at least Clooney, he had the head bobbing and he had the one-liner puns, but it was within a comedy genre, flambastic type of thing, so that's what it was. Whereas Batman has the growling bear voice in a film that's pretending to be a hyper-realistic crime drama, so it stands out a little bit more like nails on a chalkboard. But having said that, to this day, Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne is still number 1. Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne to me is number 2. And then I would place, Clooney and Val Kilmer probably at the next spot tied, and, Pattinson tied with them, right? Because I think they all did an okay thing with Bruce Wayne. But film-wise, I think this ranks pretty highly as a Batman film because it has things that we haven't seen. It has the detective nature, which we haven't seen. It's the first probably three-hour. I don't know how long Dark Knight Rises was. I think it was pretty long, but this is the first Batman film that's near 3 hours long, and it's the first Batman film that I think blends fantasy with hyper-realism, and I think does realism effectively, which is what Nolan wanted to do. And I think the Nolan films have a great ensemble cast, production value, but I don't think they did what they set out to do as effectively as this does. I think this does it more effectively. But I give it 7 out of 10 because it's got a lot of open-ended seeds and certain elements that work really well and certain elements that don't. But the bad elements don't hinder it enough to not be a good film. So it's still a good film, even with the elements that are a little bit like wonky, right? So yeah, for me it's Batman '89, followed by Batman Returns, followed by The Batman. And then, you can get into Batman Forever, Batman Begins, followed by Dark Knight Rises, and then last Batman and Robin. And the Nolan series still has some of the best villains ever, right? Cillian Murphy was great as Scarecrow, Ledger was great as Joker, Hardy was great as Bane. But I will say this though, I did not like the Carmine Falcone in Batman Begins, and I thought one of my favorite Batman villains in any Batman movie, that I think is as great a performance as what Keaton did as Batman because it's so understated, was Totoro as Carmine Falcone in the Batman. I think if you took him out of this film, it changes the whole film. And I think the way that he played it so low key is a really great Batman villain, and it stands out even though he's just a regular mob boss. He's not one of the freaks. He's not one of the crazy rogues galleries. He's just Carmine Falcone, but he was one of the most effective villains. And I think it's the same thing with Gordon too. We didn't talk about Gordon too much, but I think Gordon did a
Yeah,
great job.
you know that guy's a
Very
great.
subdued, very quiet performance.
I remember that guy from Westworld. Very good actor.
Yeah, he has that gravitas, right? Like that voice when he like he's almost like a mentor character. Like he has that gravitas where he could be like you could see him be like a Jedi master, or you could see him be like you know how is it Morgan Freeman I think has that gravitas, or um James Earl Jones when he did Darth Vader had a
Yeah,
presence, right? Like there's certain
exactly.
actors that have a presence, right? And I think one of the biggest difference between this Gordon versus Gary Oldman's Gordon is that Gary Oldman's Gordon was great, and obviously Gary Oldman's a great actor. But when you got to Dark Knight, he was almost like the scene where he's begging with Two-Face, no, 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 don't hurt my little boy, and this and that, right? It's almost like he kind of goes a little bit into melodrama, right? And the thing about that Gordon is he had good presence and he had good acting, but he didn't necessarily have gravitas. Whereas I think this Gordon, because of the voice, and I think gravitas has to do with your voice, but because of his voice, he has a gravitas presence that the other Gordon didn't really have. Not that the other Gordon was bad, it's just it didn't have that vocal presence. And it's actually really funny. There was an audiobook, a Batman audiobook that came out where I'm pretty sure oh god, what's his name? I'm pretty sure he also did the voice of Batman. So he's done the voice of Batman in an audiobook, but he's also played Gordon in the Batman. So
Interesting.
it just goes to show like he has the vocal ability to play Batman on an audio tape and then to then play Gordon in the movie. It was an unrelated project, I believe, not tied together, just by happenstance, from what I remember.
Yeah, man. So yeah, guys. That was our Batman review. Yeah. So go ahead and check out Batval's page, YouTube channel, and yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff. I know I gained a couple subscribers from my last couple videos, so yeah, trying to get up there. So we're a bit late on this one, but I wanted to sort of sink in and think about it before I start talking about it. But Val, thanks for coming on once again.
Yeah, anytime. And I do want to say, like, I can totally, like, even though we have the sensibilities and we have where we place certain Batman films and how we feel about different Batman films, I do think overall this was a good film. So I do think anybody that was supporting the film before it came out, even like I had low expectations going in, and my expectations were lower than what the film delivered. So I was pretty happy coming out of the theater. So I think, and that's even being against the realistic thing. It didn't bother me that much with this film. So anybody that was like a supporter or a fan of this film, I completely get it and I completely understand. The Nolan films I didn't get as much because I always felt those were a little bit of a false liftoff. I always felt that they were trying to do something but they did something else. Whereas with this, I feel it did what it set out to do, and I feel that they did it effectively enough that you really can't say it's a bad film. Whereas some of the Nolan films, you could break it down and show how it's a bad Batman film.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. As a film, this is definitely up there as one of the better ones. It's just for me, I feel like there was some stuff in this that just kind of felt a little bit. Some of the Batman stuff I felt was not quite in character, and there was some stuff. The movie just felt to me a bit too long. Like they could have done more with the time they had. Too many subplots, but yeah, like I said, above average. Pretty good, pretty good. Could have been better, but All right, guys. We're gonna go ahead and get out of here. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.